Chapter 127. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Senior Marshal Sister, you have a good memory." Su Qingjun glanced at him. She didn't feel shy, but she seemed a bit embarrassed that she forgot the name of the person in front of her. At the same time, a series of shouts came from behind the crowd. Lu Chen coughed. For some reason, he recalled He Changsheng's humiliated appearance just now. He originally wanted to step aside, but he stopped and smiled at Su Qingjun. "Right, I forgot to congratulate Senior Marshal Sister for advancing your cultivation and attaining the Jin Dan Great Path." Su Qingjun nodded with an indifferent expression. It seemed she had heard such words too many times recently and was numb to it. However, the shouts in front of her piqued her interest. She glanced in that direction. At this time, Lu Chen said, "I'm ashamed to say this. Back then, you said that the red ambergris ginseng would be very useful for breaking the realm, so I also carefully cultivated it. Unfortunately, that kind of accident happened. I'm really sorry." Su Qingjun was startled for a moment, then she shook her head and said, "This can't be blamed on you. The earthquake is a natural disaster, and the wild beasts can't help but steal it. It's the will of the heavens." Lu Chen thought that the black dog was nothing but a fart of heaven's will. However, at this moment, he had the intention of delaying it so that the youngsters of the Su clan could be taught a lesson. He revealed a guilty expression and sighed, saying, "Even so. Sigh, let's not talk about it. Fortunately, Shiji Su, your talent is outstanding. Even without the red ambergris ginseng, you were still able to break through to the Jin Dan realm. Congratulations." Su Qingjun said, "No, I still use the red ambergris ginseng." Lu Chen was stunned. "What? But the red ambergris ginseng is gone, you." Su Qingjun said, "Oh, that's just a small matter. Although the red ambergris ginseng is precious and rare, it's not to the point of being unique. Before I broke through, I sent someone to the biggest shop in Kunwu City and bought 2 stalks. Their age and medicinal effects are better than the previous one." "How much?" 22,000 spirit stones. Lu Chen stared fixedly at Su Qingjun. He saw that her expression was calm, as if this was only natural. After a while, he smiled bitterly and nodded. "Congratulations, congratulations." Su Qingjun politely nodded to him and said, "Thank you." Lu Chen took a step back and stood to the side, allowing Su Qingjun to walk past. Then he looked into the distance, but all he could see were the mountains rising and falling, the sky high and the earth high. After a while, he suddenly cursed in a low voice. *CK them, as Su Qingjun walked into the crowd, the first person to approach her suddenly became silent. Then, he consciously moved to the side and looked at her with a strange gaze. Soon, more and more people became aware of it. The originally noisy crowd quickly quieted down, and the path also moved faster and faster, allowing Su Qingjun to walk in. Bang! Sumo staggered backward and fell to the ground. She rolled twice and just happened to lie down in front of a pair of beautiful and slender feet. At this moment, one of his eyes was black and one side of his face was swollen. He looked like he had just been beaten. Sumo seemed to be a bit dizzy from the beating. He staggered and raised his head. After a while, he saw the beautiful face in front of him clearly. He was stunned for a moment before he suddenly shouted, big sister, quickly come and save me." There was a commotion in the crowd. Someone said in a low voice, "She actually came." Su Qingjun frowned and looked at Sumo's face with a slightly gloomy expression. The few people who were still fighting at the side also stopped in shock and quickly separated. Just now, in the fight between the two sides, although everyone was Qi refining disciples and their cultivation was not much different, Lin Kuangyi's side had 5 people while the Su family only had 3. In the end, they still suffered a loss. The other 2, Su Qian and Su Wan, were also swollen. It seemed like the 3 heroes of the Su family were more like the 3 bears of the Su family. And Lin Kuangyi's side of 5 people saw Su Qingjun suddenly appear. For a moment, they also felt a bit guilty and did not dare to be arrogant. As for Zhang Ji, who was lying on the ground, and He Changsheng, who was still kneeling on the ground, no one paid any attention to them. What happened? Su Qingjun asked Sumo. Among the 3 bears of the Su family, Sumo was her biological younger brother. Su Qian and Su Wen were considered cousins in terms of seniority, and their bloodlines were also extremely close. So seeing the 3 like this, Su Qingjun was not happy in her heart. However, she had always been educated and knew etiquette, so she first asked about the cause of the matter. Big sister, it was that Lin guy who bullied people. Sumo shouted and began to blame Lin Kuangyi's group, with her saliva flying everywhere. On the side, Su Qian and Su Wen also hurried over to help and told the story from beginning to end. On the other side, Lin Kuangyi's group became angry and couldn't help but open their mouths to argue. Both sides quarreled, and it looked like there was anger rising again. After a while, suddenly Su Qingjun lightly shouted, "Shut up." The 3 Su family brothers immediately shut up. On the other side, Lin Kuangyi's group looked at each other and also quieted down. Su Qingjun glanced at the stone garlic in the spiritual field and saw that the spiritual plant was indeed very beautiful. After a moment of silence, she looked at Lin Kuangyi and didn't say much. She only asked, "Do you have proof?" Lin Kuangyi's group of 5 looked at each other in dismay and were momentarily speechless. In this quarrel, everyone took advantage of the chaos to fight. Young people were fooling around and no one cared. Whoever had the bigger fist was the one in the right. But if they really started to reason, these young people from aristocratic families weren't really stupid. How could they not know that there were some things that didn't make sense? That stone garlic was planted by me. I know, I recognize it. Suddenly, a voice shouted. Everyone was startled and looked over. They saw that it was He Changsheng, who was kneeling on the ground, shouting loudly with his neck straight. The faces of Sumo's group darkened and they glared at He Changsheng. On the other side, Lin Kuangyi's group was overjoyed. They didn't care so much and started to make a ruckus. They repeatedly said, "That's right, that's right. He was the one who planted the stone garlic. Other than him, no one else can recognize that spiritual plant. That's right. In this grass garden, this person is the best at planting stone garlic. If he says there's a problem, then there must be a problem." All kinds of discussions surged. Su Qingjun slightly frowned and glanced at He Changsheng. And behind the crowd, Lu Chen also looked over from afar. He didn't say anything and only shook his head slightly. "You mean, that stone garlic is the one you originally planted?" As soon as Su Qingjun said this, the surroundings became quiet. Even Lin Kuangyi's group didn't say anything. This kind of quiet atmosphere made He Changsheng a little nervous. At the same time, he looked at Su Qingjun's exceptionally beautiful face. His breathing seemed to become a little hurried. After a while, he finally said, "Yes, I planted it." "Do you have proof?" Su Qingjun asked. He Changsheng was startled and loudly said, "That was planted by me. I recognize it, I recognize it." The surrounding crowd was silent. At this moment, many people seemed to have thought of something, but no one spoke. Su Qingjun shook her head. Her tone was still calm, but the meaning in her words was very clear. "This won't do. You need proof. You can't say that something is yours and then it must be yours, right?" She pondered for a moment and said, "Material evidence or witness is fine. You can choose any one. As long as it makes sense, I will let second brother return the stone garlic to you." As she said this, she looked at Lin Kuangyi and said, "Junior brother Lin, do you think it's okay for me to deal with it like this?" Lin Kuangyi smiled bitterly and said, "Okay." With Jean Dan Friar standing there, and one with a bright future, he dared to say no. Moreover, Su Qingjun's words from the beginning to the end were reasonable. He couldn't say anything more. Proof? When everyone's eyes focused on He Changsheng's face, he was confused and murmured, material evidence? Witness? This, but it was really planted by me. The crowd was silent. The Su family was looking at him. The Lin family was looking at him. Everyone was looking at him. It was as if the heavens and earth were looking at him. He knelt in the crowd, but it was as if he was outside of the cold world. After a long time, Su Qingjun didn't say anything. Instead, Sumo, who was standing beside her, sneered and said, "Hey, that guy, do you have proof or not? Quickly say it." He Changsheng's face turned red. He stammered, "Material evidence? Where is the material evidence? You don't believe my words? Witness, yes, witness." He suddenly jumped up, looking wild with joy. He loudly said, when I planted the stone garlic, many people saw it. You, right? You all saw me planting the stone garlic, right? Didn't I plant it very well? Didn't I plant the best stone garlic in the fragrance garden? What do you think?" There was a slight commotion in the crowd, but it quickly quieted down. No one spoke, and no one whispered. When he pointed at others, especially the odd job disciples with the same status as him, those people quietly avoided him or remained silent. He Changsheng was stunned. His face was ashen, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. But at this moment, his eyes suddenly lit up, as if he saw something. After a moment of hesitation, he suddenly shouted and rushed over. The crowd moved aside. Su Qingjun and the others also looked at his actions. He Changsheng rushed into the crowd and stopped in front of Lu Chen, whose face had changed slightly. Then, they saw him laughing loudly. He grabbed Lu Chen's hand and dragged him into the field. Then, he hugged Lu Chen's hand tightly and looked at Lu Chen with eyes full of expectation. With a slightly trembling voice, as if he was entrusting his life's hope, he said, "Lu Chen, you are the best friend of mine, and we talk the most. Tell me, you can testify for me. That stone garlic, is it mine or not?" In a moment, everyone's eyes fell on Lu Chen, including Su Qingjun, who also looked at him with a slightly surprised expression. Beside her, the 3 brothers of the Su family and the 5 people of the Lin family also looked at this lowly odd-job disciple with complicated expressions. Lu Chen expressionlessly looked around, and then turned his head, quietly looking at He Changsheng. That man was looking at him with eyes full of gratitude and hope, as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. He tried his best to show a trace of a smile, and then softly said, "Lu Chen, help me, tell me." Chapter 128. The cold mountain breeze blew from afar, ruffling people's clothes, making them feel a trace of coldness. 2 figures slowly walked over from afar, one old and one young, with white hair and black hair. The old one was Melaleuca japonica, and the young girl was Xian. They looked over from afar. Melaleuca japonica frowned and instructed Xian. Xian nodded and walked over. In the crowd, under everyone's gaze, Lu Chen did not speak for a while. He Changsheng urged him, "Lu Chen, say it. Didn't you come to my place many times before? Didn't you always see the stone garlic I planted?" At this time, Su Qingjun suddenly took a step forward, looked at Lu Chen, and said, "Lu Chen, do you really know this person?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, nodded, and said, "Yes, his name is He Changsheng. Like me, he is a part-time disciple who joined the sect this year. I know him." Su Qingjun looked back at Sumo, who was beside her. Sumo smiled at her sister, but there seemed to be a trace of reluctance in her smile. Su Qingjun's eyes glimmered. It was as if a gust of wind had blown across the surface of a calm lake, causing some ripples to appear. After a moment, she turned back to look at Lu Chen, and said calmly, "You and I have not known each other for long, but when you helped me cultivate the red ambergris, you should also be a trustworthy person. Say it, if you can really prove that it is him, I will believe you. Lu Chen's gaze was slightly lowered, and the corner of his mouth slightly pursed. He seemed to be smiling, but not smiling, and seemed to be angry, but not angry. It was unknown what exactly he was feeling at this moment. At the same time, the surrounding crowd was in an uproar. When they looked at Lu Chen again, their gazes were different. He Changsheng was overjoyed. Grinning from ear to ear, he grabbed Lu Chen's arm and shouted, "Tell me, tell me, tell me. That's my stone garlic." Lu Chen narrowed his eyes. After a moment, he raised his head and looked forward. Ignoring He Changsheng, he looked at Su Qingjun indifferently, then looked at Sumo and the other two beside her, as well as Lin Kuangyi and the others on the other side, and said, "What do you want me to say? Just ask." Su Qingjun pondered for a moment before asking, among the odd job disciples in the flowing fragrance garden, is this person the best at growing stone garlic? Yes. Lu Chen replied straightforwardly. He Changsheng laughed heartily. Su Qingjun frowned slightly, then nodded, while the Su and Lin people on the other side had different expressions. But very quickly, Su Qian of the three Su family suddenly took a step forward and said, "Can I ask you a few words?" Lu Chen said, "Of course you can, please ask." Su Qian glanced at He Changsheng who was standing beside Lu Chen and said, "Since you are familiar with He Changsheng, do you know this Jianghu?" As he said this, he pointed at the odd job disciple who was still unconscious on the ground. Lu Chen said, "I know him, but I don't usually interact with him, so I am not familiar with him." Su Qian's eyes lit up. "You are not familiar with Jianghu? Not familiar. That is to say, you rarely come to Jianghu's land?" "Almost never." Su Qian clapped his hands and said, "Then have you seen the stone garlic that Jianghu planted?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment. After a while, he said indifferently, "I don't have any impression of it. I should have never paid attention to it." Su Qian laughed, looked around, and then said with a slightly complacent expression, "Then let me ask you one last time. Are you absolutely certain that this stone garlic in front of you is not the one that Jianghu planted himself?" Lu Chen was silent again. This time, everyone around him seemed to hold their breath. He Changsheng was a little nervous, staring closely at Lu Chen. Lu Chen lowered his eyes, as if he was carefully thinking, but also as if he was comparing in his heart. After a while, he raised his head, looked at everyone in front of him, and then said expressionlessly, "No, I can't be sure." Boom! The surrounding crowd suddenly seemed to explode, the sound waves rolling over. Everyone showed all kinds of different expressions. And in the field, Lin Kuangyi and the others looked at each other, revealing a bitter smile, as if they had already expected this result. And the three Su family brothers were happy. Only Su Qingjuan's face seemed to show a subtle and strange expression, looking deeply at Lu Chen. You, a hoarse shout, with disbelief and anger, came from beside Lu Chen. Suddenly, a pair of hands rushed over and fiercely pushed Lu Chen, causing him to stagger back a few steps and fall to the ground. It was He Changsheng. His face looked a little twisted, his eyes bloodshot. He looked fiercely at Lu Chen, as if the last hope in his life had been shattered by Lu Chen. "You are not human." He roared, and shouted at Lu Chen, "How dare you say that? You clearly know that the stone garlic is mine. Lu Chen silently stood up, looking at He Changsheng. That gaze was as indifferent as the mountain wind blowing, almost without any emotion, no fear, no sympathy. Deep in his eyes, the gaze was as deep as the sea, reflecting only a silent darkness. "I am just speaking the truth," Lu Chen said indifferently. "What truth? What you said is bullshit." He Changsheng was still shouting, he seemed to have lost control, his emotions were collapsing, even tears were flowing down his face, pointing at Lu Chen, then pointing at everyone around, roaring, "You are all like this, you don't believe me, obviously I am a good person." He screamed loudly, suddenly turned around and ran away, rushing out of the crowd, disappearing in the blink of an eye. When he had just rushed out, the Su family brothers seemed unwilling to let him go, wanting to stop him, but Su Qingjun coldly glanced at them, in addition to He Changsheng's frenzied expression, like a madman, so the Su family brothers gave up. At the side, Lin Kuangyi and a few others discussed in low voices. Then, he walked to Su Qingjuan's side and smiled apologetically. "Senior Sister Su, we were indeed in the wrong today. It's all our fault for trusting that bastard and causing a misunderstanding with Brother Su and the others. Later, I will definitely apologize, just. There's no need." Su Qingjun suddenly interrupted him. "Let's end this matter here." Lin Kuangyi was a bit surprised, but then his face lit up with joy. He said with a smile, "That's great, thank you, Shiji Su." Su Qingjun glanced at him and said indifferently, "Junior Marshal Brother Lin, Su family and Lin family aren't enemies, on the contrary, our two families have been friends for several generations. If today's matter were to be spread back to Kunwa City, I don't need to say anything, I'm afraid Uncle Lin won't be happy. Have you thought about this?" Lin Kuangyi was startled, his face turned pale, and he hastily said, "Yes, yes, yes, what Shiji Su said is right, little brother was wrong. In the future, if Shiji Su needs little brother's help, just tell me, little brother will be honored to be able to help you." Su Qingjun sighed and said, "Forget it, you can go." Lin Kuangyi and the others repeatedly agreed. They didn't dare to stay here for long, so they hastily left. Su Qingjun looked back at Lu Chen, who was still standing there. She wanted to say something, but she hesitated. A trace of apology flashed across her eyes, but in the end, she didn't say anything. She just slightly nodded at him, then called out to Sumo and the others, and left. On the prairie, the crowd of onlookers also began to gradually disperse, but He Changsheng's crazy appearance just now was still deeply imprinted in their hearts. Soon, only Lu Chen was left in the crowd. He stood there silently for a moment, and just when he was about to leave, he suddenly saw a young girl standing not far from him. It was Xian. She looked around and saw that there was no one around, so she hastily ran over, gently pulled Lu Chen's arm, and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, don't be angry, I saw everything just now, those people, I'm fine." Lu Chen interrupted her words, and smiled. Xian blinked, and said, "Really?" Lu Chen looked at the young girl in front of him with a smile, looking at her beautiful face under her soft long hair, and his gentle eyes hid a trace of concern. "I'm fine, really," he said softly. "Okay." Xian immediately became happy, then pointed to the front, and said, "Marshal Uncle Yen is still waiting for me there, I'll go first." Lu Chen smiled and nodded, and said, "Okay, you go." Xian smiled and turned to leave, the mountain wind blowing up the corner of her clothes, like a flower fluttering in the world. This scene, this matter, quickly passed. Some people took it as a bolt from the blue, thinking that the sky had broken, while others thought that it was just a small matter like the waves of the river and the sea. From that day on, He Changsheng and Lu Chen became enemies. When they occasionally met on the road, he would stare at Lu Chen with an extremely resentful look, as if he wanted to kill Lu Chen with his eyes. Of course, Lu Chen clearly felt this blatant hatred, but he felt a little bored and a little funny. Of course, he didn't show it on the surface. Most of the time, he just passed by He Changsheng indifferently and expressionlessly. A few days later, somehow, this matter was suddenly known by the people in charge of Baichao Tang. It was said that a big shot couldn't stand it after knowing it, and told the people in charge of Baichao Tang. As a result, Baichao Tang suddenly became angry. The three brothers of the Su family, Lin Kuangyi and the other four were all fine, but only the handyman disciples were punished. He Changsheng, Zhang Ji, and Lu Chen were called to the supervisor, and they were scolded heavily. In the end, regardless of the twists and turns, Zhang Ji and He Changsheng were the cause of the trouble, and 20 spiritual stones were deducted directly. Lu Chen was only caught to testify, so he was not to be blamed. So, the fine was waived, and he was released after a scolding. From then on, Xianxia seemed to become more and more abnormal. Every day, he would ramble on and on. Some people even saw him sharpening a sharp blade and carrying it with him. It was as if he was about to go crazy. And according to people living near him, these days, Xianxia said the most, "I'll kill you, I'll kill you." Chapter 129. This morning, Lu Chen took Atsu out. As usual, in order to ensure the safety of all kinds of precious herbs in the herb garden, no birds or beasts were allowed to enter the garden. Therefore, Atsu never went there with Lu Chen. Basically, they parted ways as soon as they left the garden. Lu Chen went to the herb garden to work, while Atsu ran out to play for a day. It took care of its own food and drinks, and only came back when it was dark. This method of letting go was, of course, less troublesome for Lu Chen, but Xian often nagged about it. She was always worried that something would happen to Atsu when it wandered outside alone. However, Lu Chen did not care about her worry and ignored it. Atsu seemed to like this kind of life very much. It ran out to play all day and seemed to be very comfortable and happy. Therefore, in the end, Xian could only accept this fact. At most, when she occasionally came to visit Atsu, she would secretly bring it some of its favorite meat bones. At the door of the house, Atsu turned around and called out to Lu Chen as a greeting. Then, it ran away like a wisp of smoke. No one knew where it went to play today. Recently, Atsu seemed to like to go out, but no one knew where it went. Lu Chen was too lazy to care about it and walked all the way to the fragrance garden. After entering the herb garden and coming to the spiritual field, Lu Chen began his day's work in the breeze with a fragrant smell. However, this day did not seem to be lonely, because he had only worked for a while when Xian appeared with a smile on her face beside his spiritual field. She waved at him and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, good morning." Lu Chen patted the soil on his hands, walked to the edge of the field and sat down. He smiled at Xian and said, "I say, you are too idle. I only see you wandering around all day." Xian glared at him and said, "What do you mean?" Lu Chen said, "I remember you are at the Rock Mountain. Why do I see you at the fragrance garden every day these days? Aren't you slacking off?" Xian chuckled and revealed a proud expression. She said, "You don't understand. Martial Aunt Yen Luo has recently been transferred to Flowing Fragrance Garden to manage things here. She brought me here too." "Oh, no wonder." Lu Chen nodded and said with a smile, "It seems that Martial Aunt Yen likes you very much." "Of course, who doesn't like this lady?" Xian playfully stuck out her tongue. Just as she was about to say something, her expression suddenly froze. The joke she was about to say was stuck in her mouth. Her eyes looked behind Lu Chen as if she had seen something surprising. For a moment, she couldn't say anything. Lu Chen was slightly surprised and turned his head to look. He frowned slightly. He saw that a few dozen feet behind him, Xianxia was walking past. His pace was not fast, but his eyes were fiercely staring in Lu Chen's direction. Perhaps because he did not sleep well last night, Xianxia's eyes were a little bloodshot. His gaze was full of resentment. He looked at Lu Chen as if he had seen his father's murderer or his mortal enemy. He could only be described as gnashing his teeth. Xian couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine when he occasionally glanced at the people around Lu Chen with a look of disgust and hatred. Lu Chen stood up expressionlessly and took a step forward to stand in front of Xian, blocking Xianxia's gaze for her. At the same time, he stared coldly into Xianxia's eyes. His gaze met Xianxia's without the slightest intention of backing down. Xianxia seemed to become more and more angry when Lu Chen looked at him like this. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and his face revealed an indescribable anger. It was as if he could not believe that Lu Chen dared to look him in the eye without the slightest bit of guilt or shame. But Lu Chen just stood there calmly, silently looking straight at him with a bit of coldness. After a while, He Changsheng turned around and strode away. Brother Lu, this person, how can this person be like this? Xian poked her head out from behind Lu Chen. Looking at He Changsheng's back, there was still some lingering fear in her heart as she asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's probably because he hates me." Xian was startled for a moment and said, "Is it because of the fight over the stone garlic that day?" "Yes." "How can that matter be blamed on you?" Xian shouted. Looking at her pretty face, it seemed that it was somewhat pale from anger. She said, "That stone garlic was Sumo's, the ones who beat him and humiliated him were also the people of the Su family. The one who insisted on standing up was him. Even if we take a step back, it was Lin Kuangyi who forced him." Su Qingjuan's sister Su stood up and said a few words. What she wanted was proof, but he couldn't produce it. Everyone stood up and spoke. "So why does he only hate you?" "Yes, why does he hate me the most?" Lu Chen said to himself. After a while, he turned to look at Xian. He saw that the girl's chest was still heaving up and down. It seemed that she was not light. He couldn't help but feel a little warmth in his heart. "All right, sit down." Lu Chen smiled and pulled her arm. He said with a smile, "I'm not even this flustered and exasperated." "Why are you so angry?" "No, this doesn't make sense. I just feel wronged for Brother Lu." Xian pouted and complained. Lu Chen looked up at the sky. There were a few white clouds floating in the blue sky. After a while, he said to Xian, "Actually, I told you the reason." "Ah, what is it?" Xian was startled. "It's because I'm weak," Lu Chen said faintly. "Su Qingjun is a peerless genius. There's a world of difference between her and mortals. She's not someone he can have delusions about." The three brothers, Sumo, Su Qian, and Su Wen, are from the Su family. Their influence is enormous. In addition, Su Qingjun has just advanced to the Jin Dan realm. He Changsheng is courting death by provoking them. Lin Kuangyi and the others are also in a similar situation. Even if the Lin family and the Chen family can't compare to the Su family, it's really too easy for them to crush a part-time disciple like him. Lu Chen looked at Xian and said calmly, "He Changsheng's ancestors were from an aristocratic family in Kunwa City. I'm afraid he knows a thing or two about these things. So, even if he hates them, he doesn't dare to provoke them." Xian clenched her teeth and looked at Lu Chen. She said, So, no matter how you look at it, I'm still the weakest. We're all part-time disciples, and I don't have any aristocratic family background. Isn't it the safest and cheapest way to vent his anger on me?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "Everyone sees him acting like he's crazy now. In fact, that person's heart is very clear." "Shameless." Xian spat. Her face was full of anger. She said huffily, "If you have the ability, then go find the main culprit. I saw it clearly that day. He deliberately pulled you to testify for him. In the end, you didn't help him by telling the truth, so he actually hates you? If he really dares to go find those people from the Su family, I might think a bit more highly of him. He's really a coward." Lu Chen sat quietly for a while, then said, "In fact, I also didn't expect him to be this kind of person. These days, the weak are already so cowardly that they don't dare to threaten the strong. So, they only dare to pile their hatred on the weak, thinking they can vent their anger in this way. They think they can become valiant in this way. Don't you think it's ridiculous? It's really disgusting." Xian frowned and said with a face full of disgust. Then she shook her head and sighed, saying, "Brother Lu, why do I feel that, ever since I met you, I've always heard these not so good things. The more I hear, the more I feel that the world is always dark and there's no light at all." Lu Chen laughed and couldn't help but pat Xian's head. He said with a smile, that's because you haven't seen these things since you were young. I told you to broaden your horizons, but you actually don't want to. Xin covered her head and hit Lu Chen's arm. She complained, don't pat my head, I've become stupid. It's not that I don't want to, it's just that I feel uncomfortable listening to it. Lu Chen looked at her deeply, which made Xin feel a little unnatural. She said, Brother Lu, why are you looking at me like that? Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, actually, although there are many bad things in this world, I used to think that the whole world is, that dark, you mentioned. But after so many years, I don't think it's like that. There are still some very good things in this world. Xin's eyes lit up. She said, what are they? Lu Chen looked at her and said with a smile, for example, when you smile, you're very beautiful. It's like the sun is shining on you. Xin was stunned for a moment. After a moment, her cheeks suddenly flushed red. She jumped up and stammered, what did you say? Lu Chen said with a smile, can't I say you're beautiful? Ah. No one knew what Xin muttered, but she suddenly stamped her feet. She looked at Lu Chen with a mixture of joy and anger, then she turned around and ran away. Lu Chen shook his head with a smile. He got up and returned to the spiritual fields, ready to continue working. But before he could bend down, he suddenly heard the sound of hurried footsteps. He looked up and saw that it was Xin running back with a red face. Lu Chen said with a smile, what's wrong? I'm telling you, even if you're happy to hear it, I won't say it again. Shoo shoo shoo. Xin's face became even redder. She said angrily, Who wants to hear it again? I forgot to tell you something. Lu Chen said with a smile, what is it? Say it. Xin's eyes seemed to be drifting. She didn't dare to look Lu Chen in the eye. She just glanced to the side and said, I went back to my home in Kunwu City yesterday and brought some pretty good tea. Do you want some? Yes, Lu Chen answered without hesitation. Xin seemed to be a bit happy and giggled. But soon after, she seemed to remember something and said, right, there's one more thing. Yesterday, when I was about to leave the city, a fatty suddenly stopped me and asked me to tell you that the blue butterfly dew you ordered last time has arrived. He asked you to go down the mountain to get it when you have time. Lu Chen's expression suddenly turned cold. Chapter 130. Brother Lu, what is blue butterfly dew? Xin looked at Lu Chen and asked in confusion, I've never heard of it before. Is it a rare mystical material? Lu Chen's pupils shrank slightly. After a moment, he took a deep breath and his expression returned to normal. He smiled and said, oh, that's not a mystical material. It's just a kind of fine wine. It's not worth much. It's wine. Xin shrugged. It was obvious that she had no interest in things like wine. She bid farewell to Lu Chen and turned to leave. However, at this moment, Lu Chen called out to her. Xin said, Brother Lu, is there anything else? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, Xin, you have to be careful in your daily life. Don't trust others too easily. Xin was a little surprised and said, Brother Lu, what do you mean? Is there something wrong with the person who asked me to pass on the message? That's not it. Lu Chen shook his head and seemed to smile bitterly. He then coughed and changed the topic, saying, there are too many bad people in this world. You're young and you look a little silly. I'm afraid you'll be taken advantage of. Hey, who's silly, who's silly? As expected, Xin was immediately led astray by his words. She started to shout and huff. Lu Chen nodded with a smile and said, anyway, that's roughly what I meant. Oh, right, he Chongsheng from before. Stay away from him if you don't have anything to do. If he really attacks me like a mad dog and injures you by accident, it'll be terrible. Xian nodded and said, I know. Don't worry. She turned and left. Her footsteps were light, and she seemed to be in a good mood. Lu Chen stood behind her, looking at her receding figure. He stood silently for a moment, turned around, and suddenly scolded in a low voice, Damn fatty, what are you trying to do? At the foot of the Dog Head Mountain, Atsu trotted all the way over. It had been many days since the earthquake. Many of the celestial birds and beasts that had fled here on that day had unknowingly returned, and once again occupied their orderly positions on the strange mountain top. When Atsu walked over, many animals saw him. The birds chirped, the ferocious beasts roared, and an ostrich accidentally kicked Atsu's butt as it passed by. There were even more exotic beasts who remembered how pathetic Atsu looked when he was thrown off the mountain peak. They all looked at Atsu with disdain and schadenfreude as he carefully walked up Dog Head Mountain. The huge figure was still shrouding the top of the mountain. Rhinoceroses, fierce tigers, lions, giant elephants, and red-crowned cranes danced in the air. There were even more exotic birds and beasts that Atsu had never seen or heard of before. It was unknown how so many of them had gathered in Kunlun Mountain. Among them, there were quite a few ferocious beasts. When Atsu passed through their territory, they either provoked, obstructed, or intimidated him, causing Atsu to look back at every step, for fear that he would accidentally become food in the stomachs of others. With great difficulty, Atsu slowly climbed to the top of the Dog Head Mountain. The journey was really exhausting. Atsu was so tired that he was half hanging out his tongue and panting. After resting for a while, he looked back and saw a huge oxen lying on the top of the mountain. Its eyes were half closed, as if it was dozing off. Atsu waited for a moment, and then he started to stride towards the green ox. At the same time, the entire mountain was deathly silent. The gazes of countless immortal beasts were looking towards the peak of the mountain, and they were waiting for the next shadow to be tossed down. Atsu wagged its tail and slowly walked to the side of oxen, which was like a small mountain. It still seemed to be a little cautious, and in the silent atmosphere of the mountain, it seemed to be a little nervous. Woof! Atsu's bark was a little low, and there was some hesitation in it. It was more like a question. At this moment, a black figure suddenly swept across the sky. It was the thick and abnormally agile tail of oxen. Immediately, all the beasts on the Dog Head Mountain became excited. Lions and tigers raised their heads, and celestial birds spread their wings. All of them widened their eyes and stared at the top of the mountain. After a while, the tail gently fell and stroked the soft fur on the back of the black dog in front of Oxen. It patted it and then retracted it. Oxen opened and closed its eyes, and then yawned. All the beasts on the mountain were dumbfounded. Atsu was stunned for a while, then suddenly jumped up and ran to the top of the mountain. It shook its body fiercely at all the beasts on the bottom of the Dog Head Mountain, and then cried out in joy, "Woof woof woof woof! Woof woof! Woof!" Everyone on the top of the mountain was silent. Only the mountain breeze blew past, and the black dog stood on the top of the mountain, looking particularly awe-inspiring. At noon, Lu Chen found an excuse to go down the mountain and went to Kunwa City. Passing through the bustling long street, he seemed to turn a blind eye to the liveliness around him and went straight to the city wall. However, this day, he didn't directly enter the city wall. Instead, he circled the street outside the alley twice and waited for another hour before he entered the alley and arrived at the Black Hill Pavilion that was completely deserted. The fat old ma was lying on his beloved recliner drowsily. When he heard footsteps, he jumped up and said without opening his eyes, "Sir, look around. Our store has a lot of spiritual materials, and the price is cheap." "Oh, it's you." Lu Chen looked at him and said with a sneer, "It's me. Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Old Ma let out a big yawn and sighed, "I thought there was finally business coming to my door." Lu Chen spat and said, "Dream on. Since this store opened, how many business deals have you made? Tell me." Old Ma coughed and said with a stern expression, let's not talk about the past. We have to look forward. Besides, what's wrong with dreaming? What if it succeeds? Lu Chen stretched out a finger and gestured at him. Then, his expression slightly darkened. He stared at Old Ma and said, "Tell me clearly, why did you suddenly drag that little girl, Xin, into this?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "I have something urgent to talk to you about, but you just don't go down the mountain recently. Isn't there no other way?" Lu Chen said without any trace of politeness, "Nonsense. You are so well informed and have so many connections. You can investigate whoever you want in the Kunlun party. There are at least dozens of spies in the mountain. Who did you call to tell me that I can't do it? Why did you have to drag an innocent girl into this?" Old Ma looked at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "What's wrong? I've never seen you so concerned about others." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Don't provoke me. We've been playing these things for a long time. I'm just telling you that Xin has nothing to do with this matter. Don't drag her into this." Old Ma looked at him and said indifferently, "Is that what you mean?" Lu Chen seemed to have thought of something. He frowned and said nothing. Old Ma then smiled and said, "Those spies you mentioned are the same as you. If there is any danger, they will also put their lives in my hands. So, if I have to choose someone, of course I will protect my people. That girl from the Yi family was doomed from the day she met you. Why are you pretending to be stupid? Are you addicted to being Brother Lu in front of her? Do you really think you are a good person who can protect her for a lifetime?" Lu Chen suddenly raised his head and looked at Old Ma with cold eyes. However, Old Ma did not dodge. He just looked at him coldly. The atmosphere in the shop was icy cold. After some time, Lu Chen suddenly said, "You would never talk to me like this normally. What happened?" The fat on Old Ma's face trembled. It seemed as if he was suddenly annoyed. He said angrily, "Nonsense. I've always been this straightforward." Lu Chen did not look at him anymore. He turned to look around the shop and muttered, "There doesn't seem to be any assassins lying in ambush. Maybe they are hiding outside?" After pausing for a moment, he suddenly took a step in front of Old Ma and stretched out his hand to grab the fat on his face. Old Ma cried out and struggled free. "What are you doing?" he asked angrily. "I am checking to see if you have been forced to eat poison to harm me." "Bah! Bah!" Old Ma's spittle almost landed on Lu Chen's face. "Go to hell. You are the one who ate poison, the kind that rots your heart, lungs, and intestines." Lu Chen clapped his hands and looked at Old Ma with contempt. "Remember to wash your face more next time. I can't stand a fat man with oily face." Old Ma kicked, but Lu Chen easily dodged it. Old Ma cursed and pointed to the back hall. "Let's go there," he said grumpily. "Why?" "He wants to see you." Lu Chen suddenly fell silent and looked at Old Ma. The anger on Old Ma's face disappeared at that moment. He looked at Lu Chen with concern. After a while, he sighed and said, "Go." Lu Chen nodded and walked towards the courtyard at the back of the hall. After taking 2 steps, Old Ma suddenly said, "Oh right, you should tell that Miss E yourself when you get back." Lu Chen stopped and did not look back. "What is it?" Old Ma said indifferently, "The girl is young and naive. She trusts others too easily. I only said a few words and she believed me. She didn't even think to ask me how I knew about your relationship with her." Lu Chen was silent. After a while, he slowly shook his head. He did not say anything and walked to the back hall. After passing through the long and narrow alley, he saw the familiar square courtyard. However, unlike before, this time, Lu Chen saw the figure of that person at first glance. When that abnormally fat and broad figure sat in the small courtyard, it even gave off the illusion that the courtyard was almost filled to the brim. His loose robe, sitting cross-legged, and shiny bald head all spoke of this person's identity. A bird flew over the courtyard by chance. It seemed to be tired or curious. It slowly fluttered its wings and landed on his bald head. It did not seem to feel any hostility, but it also seemed to feel that it was only a stone under its feet. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked ahead and smiled. He waved at Lu Chen and said gently, "You're here. Come and sit." Chapter 131. Lu Chen took a few steps forward and sat down on the stone steps in the small yard. He was a little far from Perfected Lord Tianlan, but they could still see each other clearly. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him without any anger on his face. His eyes were gentle and there was even a hint of a smile on his lips, as if he was looking at a stubborn and naughty child. "How have you been?" he asked Lu Chen with a smile. Lu Chen said, "Not bad. Is there any progress on that matter?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said lightly, "Old Ma knows all these things and he must have told you clearly. Why do you still ask me?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "He is not you after all. There might be some differences when he conveys the message in the middle. Besides, I still want to hear you say it again." Lu Chen frowned and said after a moment of silence, "I still don't have any clues. I didn't find any traces of the devil cult's activities on Kunlun Mountain either. I can only slowly investigate it now. I randomly set a few targets and asked Old Ma to investigate them first and see what the results are." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded with an indifferent expression and said, "I got it. But I'm a little curious about the two people you want to investigate. Why did you choose these two girls instead of others?" Lu Chen said expressionlessly, "There's no reason. I just met them a few times and it was convenient." Convenient. Even though Perfected Lord Tianlan was experienced and knowledgeable, he couldn't help but smile bitterly at this moment and said, "It seems that those two girls are a little unlucky to know you." Lu Chen looked up slightly and said, "If they are the spies of the devil cult, then they are really unlucky." "All right." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and waved his hand. "Anyway, you just do it. I believe in you." Lu Chen smiled, then glanced at him and said, "Why do you have the time to visit me today? I remember that you have been staying in Zhengxianmeng for a while, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "I've been back for a while now and I've always wanted to meet you. However, it's really inconvenient on Kunlun. Now that you're at the foot of the mountain, it's rare for you to come down. That's why it's been delayed until today." He smiled and said, "Actually, if you don't come today, I'll be leaving tomorrow." Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then said, "No wonder Old Ma was so anxious." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled without saying anything. Lu Chen frowned and suddenly said, "You've been back for a while and you came back secretly without anyone in the sect knowing?" His eyes suddenly brightened and sharpened as he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan. "Did something happen in the sect? Something came up. What is it? It's not convenient for me to tell you." Lu Chen's eyes flashed and he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan. "Oh, you can't even tell me?" Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a while and then shook his head. "It's still hard to say. However, I might be able to tell you when you're done with this and I take you in as a disciple." Lu Chen looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan and the light in his eyes grew brighter. He suddenly stood up and said, "Seems like it's a big matter." "Yes, it's a big matter. And it's a big secret of the Kunlun party." "I think so." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "Why? Are you very curious and want to know?" "Yes." Lu Chen answered crisply, "What secret is there in the Kunlun party that the fiend cult coveted it so much that they even bet the fate of the entire sect on it? There must be something behind it. It might be helpful in finding the fiend cult spy. I want to know." Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment as though he was weighing the pros and cons in his heart. Then, he smiled apologetically and said, "I'm sorry, I still can't tell you. However, I can tell you that only Senior Brother Bai Chen and I participated in that matter. I believe it has nothing to do with the fiend cult spy that you mentioned. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. After a while, he shook his head slowly and said, "You two perfected lords are highly respected. It's naturally impossible for you to collude with the fiend cult." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled without saying anything. He looked at Lu Chen and a dark light flickered in the depths of his eyes like gentle waves on the ocean. The bird chirped and didn't fly away even after a long time. It seemed to be reluctant to part with Perfected Lord Tianlan's huge bald head. It looked around and occasionally pecked at the shiny skull with its beak. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan looked calm as though he did not care about the bird at all and did not feel the pain at all. "Is there anything I can help with?" Perfected Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen asked, "You want to help me? Shouldn't I? I was the one who asked you to do this. If there's anything I can help with, I can also do something in passing. There are a few people. Help me kill them," Lu Chen said. Perfected Lord Tianlan said. "That's not very good, right?" After thinking for a while, he said, "Are you sure that those people are suspected to be fiend cult spies?" "No, I just don't like them," Lu Chen said and then added, "Just like you." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled bitterly and sighed. "I shouldn't have told you the truth back then," Lu Chen sneered. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with gentle eyes that still seemed to be doting. However, after a while, he suddenly said, "Little Lu, I realized that you're a little different from before." Lu Chen said, "What? You don't seem to be afraid of me anymore." Lu Chen sneered and said sarcastically, "Look at what you're saying, as if I've been afraid of you for so many years. Didn't I say the same thing to you a few years ago?" Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "That's not it. Back then, even though you were always joking around in front of me, you still had some respect for me. Come on, why would I be afraid of you? You're not afraid of me. You respected the word, Perfected Lord, deep in your heart. At that time, I could tell that you, like almost all the cultivators in the world, had an instinctive fear and admiration for the supreme position of Perfected Lord, this realm, and the strength that this title represents." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were unusually bright as he looked at Lu Chen. It was as if he could see through his body and see through his organs. That's the supreme realm that billions of cultivators can never reach in their entire lives. For thousands of years, everyone respected it. Everyone is the same. I can tell. Ha! Lu Chen laughed, but there seemed to be a slight change in his expression. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and said slowly, "But when we met in the Barren Valley previously, I felt that something was wrong. However, I couldn't figure it out no matter how I thought about it." His eyes flickered slightly and he said gently, "It was only when I looked at you just now that I suddenly understood what was wrong." The smile on Lu Chen's face suddenly disappeared as he looked at the fat man coldly. Perfected Lord Tianlan pointed at Lu Chen and said calmly, "You're not afraid of me anymore. To be exact, you, an ordinary cultivator with such a low cultivation base, actually no longer have that instinctive reverence for the strength of a soul formation Perfected Lord." Lu Chen said coldly, "I don't understand what you've been talking about." Perfected Lord Tianlan narrowed his eyes and stared at Lu Chen as if he was re-examining him. After a while, he suddenly said, "God-subduing mantra, right?" Lu Chen's face suddenly turned pale. When Atsu ran out of the forest, it looked at the sky. Although it was still bright, the sun was already setting in the west. It should be evening soon. Today, on the Dog Head Mountain, it was very happy and excited. It finally blended in with those immortal birds and strange beasts that usually had their eyes on the top of their heads. It made it feel proud and elated. Even its footsteps when it ran back seemed to be lighter than usual. It was a pity that dogs couldn't hum, otherwise, Atsu would definitely be whistling all the way back. From afar, it saw Lu Chen's house and Atsu ran all the way there. However, when it was about 100 feet away, Atsu suddenly stopped. It saw a figure walking back and forth outside the house. It was a man with a strange expression on his face. His face was a little red and his eyes were a little unfocused. His chest was heaving up and down as if he was gasping for breath. There was also a hand that was hidden in his chest as if he was grabbing something. That person kept looking around, but more often than not, he was staring at Lu Chen's house. He was mumbling something, but it was unclear what he was saying. He just kept pacing around the house. Atsu was a little puzzled and stared at that person for a while. But apart from his suspicious behavior, that person didn't seem to be doing anything else. Atsu waited for a while and saw that the sky seemed to be a little darker. After thinking for a while, it felt that it should go back first. So, it ran towards the house. When it ran past that person, it could see that the man glanced at it, but he didn't seem to care, nor did he do anything else. Atsu was a little relieved. It ran to the door and called twice, but the house was quiet. No one answered. Behind it, the man suddenly stopped and turned around to look at it. Atsu didn't pay attention to the movement behind it. Unfortunately, it found that there was no one at home. But now, this kind of thing was no longer a problem for it. Wagging its tail, Atsu ran to the back of the house. The small dog hole there was now its exclusive passage. But at this moment, suddenly, there was a call from behind it. Little dog. Atsu's footsteps paused for a moment. It stopped in front of the dog hole and looked back. It saw that it was the strange man from before. He didn't know when he had walked over, but he was standing not far behind it. There was a strange smile on his face, and he smiled at it. His teeth were very white. Deathly white. Chapter 132. What does this have to do with the deity vanquishing spell? Lu Chen asked. Perfected Master Tianlan looked at him and shook his head. There are thousands of cultivators in the world. 90% of them are stuck below the Jin Dan realm for the rest of their lives. Among the rest, less than 10% can break through the Yuanying realm bravely and diligently. As for those in the divine transformation realm, people can only look up to them like gods. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Do you think you're a god?" "Of course I'm not a god. At most, I'm just a fat man with a slightly higher cultivation." Perfected Master Tianlan smiled and said, "But people who haven't reached this realm won't have such thoughts." Lu Chen suddenly shut his mouth. "I've seen many people in this world, but there's only one kind of person who doesn't fear me." "What is it?" Lu Chen couldn't help but ask. "A divine transformation realm perfected master with the same cultivation as me." "You're getting more and more ridiculous." Lu Chen forced a smile and looked down at his body. Then he said, "Divine transformation realm perfected master, do I look like one?" "Of course not." Perfected Master Tianlan's smile gradually disappeared. Then he looked at him meaningfully and said, "That's why I'm very curious and curious." "What is it? Or did you see or encounter something that made you throw away the fear of a divine transformation realm perfected master?" Lu Chen's Adam's apple gently moved up and down. Under perfected Master Tianlan's bright eyes, he suddenly felt a penetrating chill. However, perfected Lord Tianlan quickly continued, "So I thought about it carefully and thought about what you had encountered in the past 10 years. In the end, after thinking about it, I realized that you had stayed in that small mountain village for the past 10 years. Your cultivation had been crippled and you had concealed your identity. There shouldn't have been any accidents. So, the accident happened before you went into seclusion." He stared into Lu Chen's eyes for a long time and said gently, "So, it must be the deity vanquishing spell, right? That secret spell is a secret of the devil cult. Only a few devil cult elders know the trick to it. But according to what happened in the Battle of Barren Valley, and what you mentioned to me a few days ago, I think those people probably wanted to use a secret spell to open the sky and cross the boundary to attract the magnificent divine power to forcefully advance to the next level." Lu Chen said coldly, they failed. It's because of you that they failed. The atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly turned cold. Lu Chen remained silent, but the breath in his chest seemed to be a little unstable, and even his breathing became a little heavier. However, Supreme Lord Tianlan continued as if he didn't care about anything. So I was thinking that something I don't know happened to you when the god vanquishing spell was running. These things are very important. They can even make you throw away your fear of perfected cultivators. Look. Yes, it's the look in your eyes. Supreme Lord Tianlan looked into Lu Chen's eyes gently and said, you clearly know that you are no match for me, and you know that there is a world of difference between your cultivation and mine. But when I exposed the secret in your heart, your first reaction when you looked at me just now was not to find a way out or beg for mercy. The corner of Lu Chen's eyes twitched slightly. He said coldly, then what do you think I am doing? Supreme Lord Tianlan said indifferently, you are looking at me. When you looked at my body, you were subconsciously examining something, as if, you were thinking, how to kill this person. Am I right? Supreme Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chen. The courtyard was silent. After a while, the little bird on the bald head suddenly jumped up and flapped its wings to fly into the sky. The two looked up at the same time and watched the little figure disappear into the distance. After a while, they retracted their gazes and looked at each other again. This is the funniest joke I have ever heard in my life. Lu Chen said expressionlessly. Supreme Lord Tianlan thought for a while and said, it is quite funny. After saying that, he actually opened his mouth and laughed 3 times at Lu Chen. Lu Chen lowered his head slightly, and then slowly, once again sat down on the stone steps. After a while, he suddenly said, damn Baldy, if you don't believe me in your heart, then I can't do this anymore. A cold breeze blew through the courtyard and seemed to blow the chill into the depths of one's heart. After a while, Supreme Lord Tianlan shook his head gently and said, of course I still believe you, little Lu. Just like what I said to you in the Barren Valley, you are the only person in this world that I trust the most. Lu Chen raised his head and saw that the abnormally tall and sturdy fatty was staring at him with a gentle gaze. What I said just now wasn't to blame you, nor did I say that you really wanted to kill me. It's just that I really want to know what you saw when you cast the god-subduing incantation that suddenly made you have such a state of mind. All these years, you have never kept any secrets from me. I feel that I know everything about you. But now that something that I actually don't understand has suddenly happened, I really want to know. Supreme Lord Tianlan smiled and said, I think it's not that hard to say. Lu Chen sat where he was in silence. The surrounding light was faintly dim. After a while, he looked up at the sky and stood up. It's late, I have to return to the mountain. Supreme Lord Tianlan looked at him quietly. After a while, he nodded and said gently, then go. I will return to the Immortal City tomorrow. Be careful here in Kunlun Mountain. Lu Chen nodded at him and then turned to walk back to the passageway. Supreme Lord Tianlan seemed to sigh softly and closed his eyes. A dim light flickered in the depths of his eyes and a trace of complicated emotion seemed to flow through them. However, when Lu Chen walked to the entrance of the passageway, he suddenly stopped and did not look back. He just stood where he was and said calmly with an almost emotionless tone, if I say that I have already told you everything that happened when the god-subduing incantation happened back then, even the smallest details, will you believe me? Supreme Lord Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at the young man's back. After a while, he said, I believe you. Lu Chen nodded and then walked out of the courtyard without saying another word. When the sky darkened, Lu Chen returned to his residence on Kunlun Mountain. He walked all the way, expressionlessly pushing open the door and turning back to lock it. When the wall and the door finally completely separated him from the outside world, he stood there quietly. He stood there for a long time. The light and shadow were quietly changing. Darkness gradually filled this place and his figure also merged into the shadows. No one would see that in his sleeves, under his lapel, there was an extremely subtle and desperately suppressed slight trembling of his hands. It was very quiet in the darkness. There was no light, no wind, and no sound. The darkness was like a surging black tide, surging soundlessly and rolling in front of him like waves. He raised his head in a daze. In the depths of his dark eyes, a black flame suddenly burned. That flame seemed to instantly bring him back to 10 years ago. Boom! That earth-shattering boom, that majestic pillar of light that pierced through the darkness, and that crack that tore through the sky. An unimaginably vast power turned into a dazzling light that shone on the figures of the four people. They let out painful and excited roars of joy. The fire raged and the strange seed seemed to be reborn, growing, and blooming in the flames. Heaven and earth. God's subduing incantation. The wild power tore apart the earth and sky. Only the dark shadow stood silently. Behind the light, a black dagger was pulled out. The black fire in the depths of the pupils suddenly flourished. It burned crazily, as though it wanted to burn through the traces of time and erase everything. It was a blade that had pierced through time, cutting through flesh and blood, stabbing into the heart. As a result, blood sprayed out like a torrent. The old and distorted, terrified and angry face turned around, staring straight into his eyes. The black fire burned. The soul roared. The dark blade stabbed into the light, and the surging power surged like a tide. It was as if it had finally found a gap in the dam, and with a loud bang, it broke through everything. Thus, the light and darkness merged into one. Thus, all cause and effect, turned into fragments, chaotically thrown away in that memory. Like a desolate night rain, it floated down and disappeared. Only that power, that incomparably powerful power, was still clearly engraved in his heart. He laid down on the cold ground in the darkness. Slowly, he opened his eyes again. It was as though he had woken up from the deepest and most difficult nightmare, painfully but firmly. He panted slightly. After a long time, when everything calmed down, he raised his right hand and quietly looked at the outline of the palm in the darkness. That hand had once held a sword. Had once killed people. And had once felt that power that fell from the sky, in the blood and fire, light and darkness. The people of the world respected the heavens, respected the earth, and respected the gods. That power was like the gods. The four figures in the intersecting light and shadow, at the last moment, seemed to be as powerful as the gods. The black fire burned in his eyes and slowly extinguished. Finally, everything returned to nothingness. Darkness filled the room. The surroundings were quiet. He lay there quietly. Suddenly, as though he had thought of something, he moved his head and slowly sat up. The surroundings were so quiet. It was as though he was the only person left in the world. At this time, Lu Chen suddenly realized that it had been a while since he had felt this lonely feeling. Every night that should have been a lonely night, every time he woke up in the darkness, he would hear a light and familiar breathing sound, and he would feel a warm and beating body. So it was because of it that he no longer felt lonely. In the darkness, Lu Chen sat for a moment. Then, he looked around. The quiet darkness was as still as water. He softly called out, "Atsu." Chapter 133. The darkness was as silent as the sea under the night sky. There was no sound, but it seemed like the undercurrent was surging. The silhouettes in the house were vague, but there was no warmth. Atsu was not in this house. Lu Chen sat silently for a while, then slowly stood up. Darkness surrounded him and rolled around him without a sound. Lu Chen looked around and saw everything that should have been in the house, except for the black dog with a lame hind leg. He was silent, his eyes shining faintly in the darkness. After a while, he walked to the back of the house, squatted down, and saw that the small dog hole that had appeared because of the earthquake was still there. Everything was the same as usual, but Atsu, who would come back to sleep every night, was gone. Lu Qin stared at the dog hole for a moment, then suddenly stood up and strode to the door. With a squeak, the door was pulled open by him. In an instant, the darkness of the night outside the house rushed in like a flood. It was a deep night outside, a night where no light could be seen. The silent, empty land was unusually desolate that night. The cold wind swept past, blowing across his face. There was a trace of coldness that seemed to seep into his flesh. The night was bleak. At dawn the next day, when the first ray of morning light shone into the house through the gap in the window, Lu Qin, who was sitting by the bed, raised his eyes and looked at the ray of dawn. There was a trace of coldness in the warmth of the morning light, as if the chill from last night had not completely dissipated. But after a while, when the sun rose, all the darkness and coldness would disappear. He sat in the house all night, but Atsu still did not come back. Lu Chen's face did not show much fatigue, but his eyes were a little cold. When the sun rose, the Kunlun party seemed to have just woken up from last night's sleep. Many people opened their doors and went out. Lu Chen was among them, beginning a new day. He walked with a calm expression, without anxiety or panic, without exhaustion or impatience. Just like in the past, he quietly walked toward the spiritual field that belonged to him in the flowing fragrance garden. At the entrance of the grass garden, he met many odd job disciples with the same status as him. Everyone was acquainted with each other and greeted him with smiles. Lu Chen did the same. As if nothing had happened, he smiled and nodded at the people around him. Just as he was about to enter the entrance of the grass garden, He Changsheng walked past him and turned his head to look at him. Lu Chen also turned to look at him. Their gazes met, and He Changsheng smiled. He said indifferently and with a hint of alienation, "Morning." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Morning." After exchanging greetings, the two of them parted ways and walked towards their respective spiritual fields. However, after walking a few feet, Lu Chen's footsteps paused. He turned around and looked at He Changsheng's back as he walked away. He stared deeply at him. The day passed peacefully and peacefully. When dusk came, the odd job disciples in the flowing fragrance garden began to pack their things and prepare to go back. Lu Chen left the spiritual field and walked outside. On the way home, intentionally or unintentionally, he took a longer detour and walked past the spiritual field that was newly assigned to He Changsheng. The spiritual field was empty. He Changsheng, who had always been diligent and willing to work, seemed to have left early on this day. Looking at the empty spiritual field, Lu Chen frowned and then left in silence. On the way back from the meadow garden, he fell behind everyone. The afterglow of the setting sun cast a slanted shadow on the ground. When he could already see his house in the distance, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He stared at his shadow on the ground for a while, then turned around and walked in another direction. Unlike the living quarters of the odd job disciples on Rock Mountain, the treatment of the odd job disciples in the flowing fragrance garden was much better. It was probably because the odd job disciples who were able to come here were much more useful than ordinary people. Therefore, most of the odd job disciples had their own rooms, and they were not close to each other. Lu Chen did not spend much effort to find He Changsheng's residence. When he walked around the house, he knew that there was no one in the house. He Changsheng had not returned yet. He turned his head to look at the setting sun, then walked to the side and sat down under a big tree. Not long after, when the sky gradually darkened, the shadow of the big tree moved over and covered his figure, making it look a little blurry. He waited here for a long time. It was not until the sky turned completely dark and the moon began to rise into the night sky that a figure walked quickly in the distance. That person's pace was not fast, but it seemed very relaxed. He was even humming a little song that others could not understand from time to time, as if he was in a very good mood. When he came close, with the help of the light, he could see that this person was He Changsheng. He obviously didn't notice Lu Chen sitting in the shadow of a tree by the side of the road. He just walked on smugly, and just like that, he walked past. And Lu Chen did not open his mouth to stop him. He just silently hid in the dark shadows, looking at He Changsheng's back with a cold gaze. The night passed peacefully. Lu Chen lay on his bed, quietly watching the darkness in the house until the sky brightened again. That night, Atsu still did not return. Early in the morning, Lu Chen, like the other odd-job disciples, got up, washed up, and went out. His cold expression disappeared the moment he opened the door, and then he warmly greeted the people around him, joked, and walked together to the flowing fragrance garden. At the entrance of the garden, he saw a few people walking in front of him. One of them slowed down, turned around, and greeted Lu Chen and the others with a smile. That was He Changsheng. When the sunlight shone on his face, he saw Lu Chen with a smile, and then a concerned smile appeared on his face. He said to Lu Chen with a smile, "Good morning." "Hey, why do you look a little haggard? Did you not sleep well last night?" Lu Chen was surprised, turned his head to look at the people around him, and said, "It can't be, do I not look awake?" The people around him laughed and shook their heads, and said, "Not at all, you look very energetic." Lu Chen breathed a sigh of relief, and said to He Changsheng with a smile, "You scared me, actually I slept well last night." The smile on He Changsheng's face seemed to freeze for a moment, then he nodded, and said, "That's a good thing." With that, he turned around and walked into the garden. Lu Chen joked with his friends next to him, but his gaze followed He Changsheng's back, and in the depths of his eyes, there was a faint flash of a dark flame. It was another normal and peaceful day. At noon, Lu Chen left his own spirit field, and walked around the garden. When he passed by He Changsheng's spirit field, he found that there was no one there. The spirit herbs in the spirit field looked a little listless, and the weeds at the side were growing a little too vigorously, as if they hadn't been taken care of for a long time. Lu Chen looked at this scene indifferently, and after standing beside the spirit field for a moment, he turned around and left. Everything seemed to be a repeat of yesterday. At dusk, Lu Chen once again came to He Changsheng's room, and after confirming that there was no one in the room, he sat down in the same position as yesterday, and began to wait patiently. Night fell, and there were no stars and no moon. This night seemed to be darker than usual. A cold wind blew in the mountains, and it seemed to be a bit chilly. The branches and leaves on the large trees shook, and the dark shadows swayed continuously. He sat in the darkness, as if he had already become one with the shadows. This night, he waited a little longer than the night before, and even when it was almost the midnight of the curfew, he saw He Changsheng's figure return from the road in the distance. But today, he seemed to be different from yesterday. He didn't have that kind of light footsteps and happy mood. As He Changsheng walked over, he let out a few angry curses from time to time. It was unknown what he was cursing, but he even looked a little flustered and exasperated. When he walked closer, Lu Chen could even see that there were a few more tears on He Changsheng's clothes, and there were also some vague dark marks, which looked like blood stains. Bastard, bastard, mother asterisk cur, are all bastards. He kept on cursing, and the expression on his face was the same as he gnashed his teeth, as if he wanted to cut someone into 1,000 pieces with a deep hatred. Then, cursing and swearing, he walked back to his room. The night wind blew coldly. The leaves rustled. Lu Chen's gaze seemed to ignite a flame in the shadows, a dark, silent flame. He stared coldly at He Changsheng's back, but until he walked back to his room, he still didn't move. After a while, he stood up, turned around, and walked into the deeper darkness, disappearing. This night, the wind was strong, and the night was cold. Lu Chen lay on his bed in his room, surrounded by darkness. Even though it was late at night, he did not feel sleepy at all. He opened his eyes and stared at the seemingly endless darkness around him. Beside his hand, the darkness seemed to be particularly thick, as though it were nurturing something strange. It twisted and turned silently, and occasionally, a flash of light would flash by, before disappearing in the blink of an eye. In the silence of the night, it was as though there was only loneliness left in the world. At this moment, Lu Chen felt as though he could hear his own heartbeat. It was eerily quiet. Until, a soft voice suddenly floated over from somewhere in the dark night. It came with the wind. It was soft and soft, almost like a gasp, almost like a soft hum. Little by little, it approached, and struggled. In the darkness, Lu Chen suddenly sat up. His eyes shone brightly, and he turned to look at the door. The night wind blew coldly. Somewhere in the darkness outside the door, there was suddenly a soft sound. It sounded like a sigh, and yet it also sounded like a call. It sounded like a strange Yin spirit, emitting a hair-raising low cry in the middle of the night. Lu Chen got off the bed, strode to the door, and yanked it open. The darkness surged over like a tidal wave, and it completely swallowed his entire body with the force to topple mountains and overturn seas. Chapter 134. The night wind blew coldly, and the chill of the night seemed to penetrate deep into his bones. Outside the door, under the shadow, a small black shadow was curled up. When it heard the sound of the door opening, it seemed to tremble. Then, it slowly raised its head and looked at Lu Chen, who was standing at the door. The night was deep and boundless, making the whole world seem like it was shrouded in darkness. Except for a bit of green light in the shadow. That was Atsu's eye. Lu Chen stood quietly at the door. For a moment, when his eyes met that slightly green eye, he even subconsciously held his breath. He originally thought that he had long been used to the darkness, that he had blended into the shadows in countless dark nights. He originally thought that he had seen a lot of blood, hatred, betrayal, and cruelty. He originally thought that his heart was already as hard as stone. He originally thought that he would no longer feel fragile, touched, sad, and the pain brought by these things. He was wrong. He realized that he was wrong. He slowly squatted down, the muscles in his body tensed up bit by bit, as if this was the only way he could control his body. In front of him, there was a thick smell of blood. He glanced around from the corner of his eyes. On the dark road that he came from, there was a faintly discernible, long line of blood. It was the result of his painful body rubbing against the hard and rough gravel, leaving behind bloodstains. Atsu was lying in front of him. It was awake, but for some reason, it was unusually quiet. Lu Chen silently reached out and stroked its body. Where his hand touched, there was a slightly wet and sticky feeling. His hand froze for a moment, then he slowly retracted it and placed it in front of his eyes. In the dim light, blood slowly flowed between his fingers and palms, like the sinister smile of a demon in the darkness. Pa! With a soft sound, a spark lit up in Lu Chen's hand, illuminating the place in front of him and illuminating Atsu in the darkness. It was as if time had suddenly reversed on this night, returning to the day when he first met Atsu in the land of chaos. The miserable shadow of the black puppy overlapped with the scene in front of him. Atsu looked very miserable. There were at least dozens of cuts on its body. Blood and flesh covered its back and abdomen. There was almost no intact skin on its body. Only half of its tail was left, and the other half was missing. Its two hind legs were completely limp on the ground, and large patches of white bones were directly exposed. Only its two front legs looked intact, but they were also badly mutilated. It looked like it had climbed back by relying on these two front legs. A piece of its ear was missing, and there were several terrifying scars on its head, as if it had been directly chopped by a sharp blade. On its face, there was a deep scar that slashed diagonally across its left eye, leaving only an empty hole with a trace of blood flowing from it. The green eyes reflected the light of the fire. That was the last, eye. A low and soft sound slowly came out from between Lu Chen's teeth. After a moment, he threw away the torch in his hand. The flame was instantly extinguished, and darkness rushed in. He stretched out his hands and gently held Atsu in the darkness. Blood flowed down and dyed his clothes red. The blood, which was no longer very warm, slowly dripped on his skin. He hugged it tightly, bringing it close to his chest. As if it had heard the familiar sound of his heartbeat, Atu raised its head, its green eyes flashing with a hint of relief, like a sparkling gemstone shining in the night, covering all its pain. It struggled to lift its body, stuck out its tongue, and gently licked Lu Chen's face. Then, its body tilted and sank into the darkness. The night was so long, and it seemed like a sad life would never end. The night wind whistled non-stop, sweeping past the towering mountains and lofty ridges, stirring up the dark clouds in the sky, but it still could not blow away the dense fog in the depths of Kunlun Mountain. A few bolts of lightning flashed through the depths of the clouds, twisting like wild silver snakes. After a moment, there was the rumbling of thunder in the sky. For strange peaks suspended between the clouds were incomparably tall. In the night, they were like four giants, standing in four directions, guarding the fog in the depths of Kunlun. On the winter peak, which was like a world of ice and snow, the highest peak was still surrounded by a violent snowstorm. On the cliff below, a skinny old man was standing with his hands behind his back, staring at the darkness below. His bright eyes, which were completely different from his withered aura, seemed to be able to penetrate the darkness and see the depths of the fog there. Not far behind him, White Lotus was standing quietly at the side. In this cold night, for some reason, the incomparably powerful True Lord did not have his two famous disciples by his side, but only this little girl who was just over 10 years old. But it seemed that White Lotus had a cold expression, standing expressionlessly. Other than the respect she had for Hakushin Jinkuin in front of her, no other emotion seemed to exist on her face. For a young girl, this seemed to be an unusual thing. After an unknown period of time, Hakushin Jinkuin turned around and looked at White Lotus. His gaze fell on the white ferret fur on her body, and he smiled and said, "Are you cold?" "Not cold," White Lotus said calmly. Hakushin Jinkuin nodded, and his eyes revealed a trace of gratification. He even sighed slightly and said, "This child, your talent is too good after all. You have only cultivated the snow wind scripture for a short period of time. Although you can't say that you have reached a higher level, but you have already made some small achievements, and you have some resistance to the cold wind and snow." White Lotus shook her head and said, "I am still far from it. Not to mention other things, if I did not have this precious ferret fur coat on me, I am afraid that I would not be able to stand here for so long." Hakushin Jinkuin smiled and said, "Even so, it is already very good. Ordinary people cannot even stay on this winter peak." White Lotus lowered her head and said, "It is all thanks to Master's training." Hakushin Jinkuin turned around and looked at the deep night in the distance, and the tall mountain peaks in the depths of the night. His eyes fell on one of them, and he stared for a long time. Suddenly, he said, "Do you know what is on that mountain?" White Lotus followed his gaze and thought for a while. Then, she said, "That should be the Summer Peak. It is the place where Martial Uncle Tianlan, another perfected lord of Huashan realm in our sect, meditates." "Yes." Hakushin Jinkuin looked at the shadow of that tall mountain, and his eyes flickered slightly. After a while, he suddenly smiled and said, "Lien, your talent is excellent. In the future, as long as you do not go astray, there is no need to say that your future is promising. I am old, and my chi and blood are declining. I don't know how long I can take care of you. If you meet your martial uncle Tianlan in the future, you must always maintain respect and must not be rude." White Lotus nodded and said, "I understand." She paused and could not help but look a little curious. Then, she said, "Master, I have not seen Martial Uncle Tianlan since I came up here. What kind of person is he?" "He." There was a flash of brilliance in the depths of Hakushin Jinkuin's eyes. He slowly looked at the dark fog that was like an abyss under his feet. After a while, he suddenly said, "My junior brother is overflowing with talent and bold vision. He is a peerless figure that I have never seen in my life." White Lotus did not seem to expect that her master would have such a high evaluation of the youngest uncle. She was surprised for a moment, and then her eyes showed a yearning look. She thought to herself, to be able to get such an evaluation from a perfected lord of Huashan realm, he must be an unimaginable genius. However, Hakushin Jinkuan smiled and looked at White Lotus with a gentle look in his eyes. He said, "When you grow up, you should be able to understand a truth." "What truth, Master?" "No one is perfect." White Lotus secretly glanced at Hakushin Jinkuan and said, "You mean?" Hakushin Jinkuan smiled and reached out to touch her head. He said, "When you grow up, I will tell you a secret, okay?" "Okay." Hakushin Jinkuan laughed and then walked away from the cliff with his hands clasped behind his back. White Lotus sneaked a peek at the darkness at the bottom of the cliff and followed. The soft light shone in the ancient tree hole. The misty green aura wrapped around the tree wall and quietly stared down. Lu Chen brought the dying Atsu here and carefully placed him on the open space beside the puddle. Atsu's injuries were extremely serious and his body was in a terrible state. He looked even more miserable than when he was in the Demon Flower Valley in the Land of Chaos. Lu Chen looked at its appearance and frowned deeply. His eyes flickered with uncertainty. He reached out and fiddled with the water, only to see that the water was clear and transparent, but it no longer had the magical green vitality from before. He had used up that magical aura. Now, there was only a cluster of strange black fire at the bottom of the puddle. Lu Chen stayed silent beside the puddle for a long time. It was as if he had thought of all the methods, but he still could not find any panacea that could save Atsu's life. It was too seriously injured. For a moment, he raised his head and looked around. This ancient tree hole was full of vitality. The tree walls were mottled and there were two strange doors hidden in the shadows. Other than that, it was like a strange place that was naturally isolated from the rest of the world. Lu Chen lowered his head and gritted his teeth. He looked at the fallen Atsu at his feet. After a while, he seemed to have made up his mind and let out a long sigh. He flipped his palm and the incomparably sharp black dagger appeared in his hand. From the side, his face was as cold as an ice-cold rock. Even his eyes had become emotionless. He no longer hesitated, and without any hesitation, he stabbed his wrist with his sword. Blood immediately gushed out and dripped down his wrist. He expressionlessly stretched out a finger and dipped it in the blood. He stared at it for a moment before pressing it forward. Chapter 135. When his finger pressed forward, drawing a bright red and dazzling blood mark in the air, deep in Lu Chen's eyes ignited a deep dark flame. In that instant, his entire aura, temperament and even breathing suddenly changed. An indescribable dark aura spread out from his body. At the same time, as if attracted by an incomparably strange power, the blood that flowed down from his wrist, the beads of blood and droplets of blood, suddenly drew out a thin line of blood that was as thin as a slippery thread. It gently floated up and silently swept past an inch or so from the ground, following Lu Chen's finger that seemed to be as heavy as 1,000 caddies as it floated forward. His finger paused, then suddenly pressed down. At the same time, the black flame in Lu Chen's eyes suddenly rose, like a sudden wild flame. A muffled sound came from the ground, like the morning bell and evening drum in an ancient mountain temple, faintly reverberating. A spot of blood appeared on the ground, then strands of blood, strangely twisting on the ground, began to spread out in many directions, forming one after another indescribable strange pattern. Lu Chen's hand slowly moved in the air, from the original one finger had become 5, the number of blood lines drawn from the blood increased, the strange pattern drawn on the ground also gradually began to take shape. It was a large triangular pattern, within it there were countless hard-to-grasp twisting patterns, but the pattern formed by the blood, with the puddle in the tree hole as the center, completely wrapped around it. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Chen's hand slowly stopped, his face looked very pale, as if he had used up most of his strength. In front of him, there was a strange blood pattern that was almost complete. It looked like a strange formation, but when one looked at it from a distance, they would suddenly discover that the strange triangular pattern vaguely resembled a tree. The water in the puddle was still calm without any ripples, as if it was not affected by the sudden appearance of the blood-colored pattern. However, for some reason, the cluster of strange black flames hidden in the depths of the water suddenly began to sway incessantly. A faintly discernible and hidden power seemed to be hidden in the still quiet blood pattern, like a person's heartbeat in the middle of the night, indistinctly, inexplicably throbbing. The entire tree hole was in silence, the green gas, the tree walls, the two mysterious and unopenable doors, all silently watched everything that happened here. Lu Chen looked at the pattern that appeared in front of him, his expression seemed somewhat tired, somewhat complicated, and a trace of inexplicable perplexity, but very quickly, his eyes lit up again. He bent over and picked up Atsu, slowly walked into the blood pattern, and knelt down beside the puddle. There were slight ripples on the water surface, reflecting his face. He silently looked at the figure in the water, and then gently put Atsu into the water. A few bubbles emerged from the water, the unconscious black dog swayed a few times in the water, and slowly sank down. Beside the water, Lu Chen took a deep breath, and suddenly slapped his palm backwards, not knowing which part of the strange blood pattern was hit, but there was a sudden sound, like thunder above the clouds, and in an instant, the ancient tree hole shone brightly. On the ground that was smeared with blood, a strange bloody light suddenly rose up and turned into a bloody and strange bloody pillar of light that was reflected in the air. The light shadow twisted violently, accompanied by a howl, as if it came from the legendary yellow springs in the depths of hell. The blood shadow trembled and twisted, gradually turning into the shadow of a huge tree. It was a vague, faintly discernible tree, a towering tree, its head reaching the sky, its roots reaching the ground, a tree that existed everywhere across the three realms. Its whole body was blood-red, as if every branch and every leaf was dripping with fresh blood. In that dreamy and terrifying illusion, countless drops of blood dripped from the terrible tree, as if hell was nothing more than this. Lu Chen took a deep look at the illusion. The corner of his eyes seemed to twitch slightly, but very quickly, he regained his senses. His arm drew a strange pattern in the void, and then slowly pressed down. Along with his action, a strange whistling sound rang out again. A strange light slowly flowed from the illusion, as if it had seeped into reality from the illusion. Bit by bit, it approached the puddle. The clear water suddenly jumped violently, as if it had felt an incomparably powerful force, and received an unimaginable stimulation. The water waves trembled wildly, breaking all the calm, and at the same time, there was a rumbling sound, coming from the depths of the puddle. The light in the blood shadow was still approaching, and it was about to touch the water. Lu Chen's face was as pale as paper at this time, but the black fire in his eyes burned more vigorously. The twisted flames even seemed to have a hint of wildness. Suddenly, the cluster of black fire in the depths of the water, as if it had been stimulated by something, suddenly flourished, and directly expanded dozens of times from the bottom of the water, like a demon directly opened its terrible mouth, and pounced upwards. Almost at the same time, the flowing light in the blood shadow touched the surface of the water. There was a sudden clap of thunder. Boom! All the water ripples suddenly shook violently, and in the midst of the rumbling sounds, they burst apart together, bringing along Atu, who was in the water, and directly rose up into the air. Under the back of that strange blood shadow, everything seemed to be stained with a smear of blood. The light shone into Atsu's body. The black fire caught up in the air, and the shadow instantly passed through Atsu's body, and then swayed in the shadow, as if it was crazily swaying towards the blood-red tree, trying to penetrate it. But the next moment, all the shadows disappeared together. Hua la 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 la, in the splashing water, Atsu fell down together with the clear water, and fell heavily back into the water. After a moment, an indescribable pain came from its mouth. It tossed and turned in the depths of the water, struggling to open its only eye slightly, and looked up. The water waves were still shaking violently, and in the chaotic light and shadow, there was a familiar face on the other side of the water waves, quietly looking at it. Although the face was pale, as if there was not a trace of blood. Atsu slowly closed its eyes again, like a child sleeping peacefully. In the quiet night, darkness seemed to be everywhere, and the vast Kunlun was immersed in the night. In the depths of the fog, behind the black board, there was a bottomless abyss of darkness that passed through the long crust of the earth, like a huge temple in ancient times. In the vast passage, there was also a sense of loneliness. No one knew where the faint light came from, and it sprinkled in this lonely temple. In the distance, the huge and ancient door was hidden in the depths of the darkness, like a lonely guard that had stood for countless years. Time seemed to have frozen here, as if there would not be the slightest change for thousands of years. But at a certain moment, in the mysterious and ancient tree hole, the blood-red rune suddenly lit up, summoning the incomparably strange blood-red tree that passed through the three realms. There was a sudden change here. The quiet darkness suddenly trembled slightly. The huge stone door stood majestically. There was no sound, no movement, and it seemed to be dead silent. There seemed to be hesitation. In the dead silence of the darkness, behind the seemingly endless and deep door, a voice suddenly came from the back. It was like the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger, as if the wind and clouds were changing, as if something was sighing deeply. The darkness suddenly expanded, expanding like a heartbeat. The entire stone door trembled, and a few tiny pebbles fell from the high, almost invisible ceiling. The buzzing sound was like thunder, and it caused the earth to tremble. But after a moment, it suddenly became quiet again, as if it was still sleeping, and as if it was sleeping peacefully, it was finally sleeping peacefully. The darkness quietly retreated, and returned to its original position. The stone door stood as straight as before, standing there silently. Time seemed to have frozen here once again, like a dream from which one would never wake up. Struggling and suffering, never waking up. This night would eventually pass, just like the countless nights in the past. The darkness would definitely pass, and the light would come. At dawn, when the morning light shone into the room through the window, a haggard Lu Chen sat on the ground. Atsu was wrapped in white cloth like a dumpling, with only one eye, mouth, and nose exposed. Atsu lay quietly in Lu Chen's arms, eyes closed, sleeping quietly. Its chest rose and fell slightly, and occasionally its face seemed to twitch, as if it was dreaming of some terrible scene. But in the end, this black dog finally calmed down, as if all the horror and fear had gone away from its warm chest. Lu Chen leaned against the wall and looked at the ray of dawn in silence. He didn't say a word. This day, he did not go out, nor did he go to the grass garden of Fragrance Garden. The Kunlun party was a place of rules, and of course, Bai Chao Tang was no exception. Fragrance Garden treated the handyman disciples better than Rockpan Mountain, but they would not indulge them at will. At least there was a daily roll call. Although sometimes after the roll call, some people would leave early after finishing their work, but the rules were rules. Unless they asked for leave in advance, there would be trouble. Lu Chen ran into trouble. Jin Dan Friar Lin Sheng, who was newly appointed to take charge of the grass garden after the earthquake, was a strict person. So when he found out that Lu Chen had skipped work for a day without reason, he called Lu Chen over the next day. "What happened? Why didn't you come yesterday for no reason?" Lin Sheng looked coldly at the young man in front of him, who did not seem to be in a good mood. There was an inadvertent but matter-of-fact contempt in the depth of his eyes. He said, "Letting you cultivate spirit herbs here is the sect's trust and training in you. Don't you know that?" Lu Chen lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he said, "I was wrong. Do you have a reason?" "A moment of carelessness during cultivation. My breath became chaotic, and my meridians flowed in the opposite direction. I suffered internal injuries." Lin Sheng glanced at him, and his eyes swept across his face. After a moment, he nodded and said, "Indeed, your internal breath is unstable, and there are signs of damage in your meridians. But you did not inform me in advance and did not come for no reason. That is wrong, and this reason cannot be defended. If your spirit herbs are damaged because of this, you will be expelled from Fragrance Garden immediately. Do you have any objections?" Lu Chen lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he said, "No, thank you for your magnanimity, uncle." Chapter 136. When he walked out of the house, Lu Chen's expression did not change. There was no anger, and no frustration. It was as if what Jean Dan Friar had said to him did not affect him at all. He just looked up at the sky. The sun was high in the sky, and the sky was blue with white clouds. It was a sunny day. He looked at it for a while, and then walked towards the herb garden. Along the way, there were people coming and going, some of whom were acquaintances. Some greeted him, and some nodded at him. But Lu Chen seemed to have something on his mind. He was silent all the way, as if he did not see anything. He walked all the way to the entrance of the herb garden. The mountain breeze blew, and the unique herbal fragrance of the herb garden wafted over. Lu Chen looked at the neat spiritual fields in front of him. He looked at them expressionlessly, and then walked forward. But the direction he walked was not towards his spiritual field. Right at this moment, a pleasantly surprised voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "Big brother Lu, you. Why do you look so pale?" Lu Chen stopped and turned around. He saw Xian running over from behind. She looked at him worriedly and whispered, "Brother Lu, are you okay?" Lu Chen looked down. After a while, he shook his head and said, "I'm fine." Xian still looked worried. "Brother Lu, do you want to go back and rest? I can help you apply for leave." Lu Chen was silent, and then said, "You better not go to Uncle Lin Sheng's place. He won't listen to you." Xian was a little surprised. "Forget it, I'll go with you first. It's not good to talk on the road." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the people around him. Finally, he looked at a place in the distance, and then nodded. "Okay." "What?" Beside Lu Chen's spirit field, the two of them sat side by side on the ridge of the field. Xian looked a little annoyed and said indignantly, "How can Uncle Master Lin be like this? He clearly knows that something went wrong with your cultivation and hurt your body, but he still punishes you like this. Isn't this bullying?" Compared to when he first came to the herb garden, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be a lot better. When he saw Xian's annoyed look, he even smiled and comforted Xian. "Forget it, it was my fault." Xian bit her lip. "That won't do. Brother Lu, you are just a servant disciple. You don't have much income in Kunlun Mountain. Don't you count on the spirit herbs as rewards? Why did Martial Uncle Lin just casually say it, and you? Because he is Jean Dan Friar." Lu Chen smiled. Xian choked. For a moment, she was speechless. She didn't know what to say. After a while, she said gloomily, in any case, I just don't feel right." After a moment of silence, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said to Lu Chen, "Big brother Lu, why don't I secretly ask Martial Aunt Yen and have her speak on your behalf? Uncle Yen is very good to me. If I ask her, she will definitely agree." Lu Chen stared at her, a glimmer of light flashing in his eyes. Then, he smiled and gently said, "No need. Your martial Uncle Yen is a well-known veteran gold core realm cultivator. That favor isn't light, so why waste it on such a trivial matter? But you, didn't I say it's okay?" Lu Chen smiled and patted the girl's head. "Why can't you remember what I said? I told you not to hit my head." Xian rubbed her forehead. However, after hearing Lu Chen's words, she relaxed a bit. She took out a small bag from her pocket and handed it to Lu Chen. "For you, brother Lu." Lu Chen took it and looked at it. "What is this?" "My family's tea." Xian smiled. "Didn't I mention it to you last time? Although this isn't our family's most famous tea, Little Crane, it's still a top-grade tea. It's not worse than most of the tea in Kunwa City's shops." Lu Chen nodded. The hand holding the bag of tea slightly tightened. When he looked up, he saw the sunlight shining down on them. The girl sitting on the ridge of the field was smiling sweetly. She was as beautiful as a flower and as warm as the sun. Even though there was a faint red scar on her beautiful face that couldn't be erased, all the darkness and sadness seemed to quietly dissipate at this moment in her warm smile. "Brother Lu, are you really okay? You look a bit absent-minded. Do you feel uncomfortable?" Xian asked. Lu Chen smiled. "I'm fine." Xian said, "By the way, I haven't seen Atsu for a few days. How is it?" Lu Chen looked at her and said, "It's fine. It's the same as usual. I can't even see its shadow when it runs around all day." Xian pursed her lips and complained, "That's right. I went to look for it several times during the day, but I didn't see it even once. Brother Lu, it keeps wandering around in the forest all day. I'm always worried that something might happen to it." Lu Chen was silent for a while and said, "What you said makes sense." Xian suddenly became excited and said, "Yes. You didn't listen to me before. Today, you actually listened to me." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry. I've been quite busy recently. After this period, I'll keep it under control and won't let it run around. You can also come and see it often." Xian giggled and said, "Okay." Time was unknown in the mountains. Day and night could not be heard in the tree hole. In the ancient model tree hole, there seemed to be a kind of gentle light that always shone here. The water in the puddle on the ground seemed to be slightly murkier than before, but it was still clear enough to see the bottom of the water. On the ground around the puddle, the strange blood lines had long disappeared. Now, there were only a few traces of blood left on the ground. There was no one in the tree hole, but there was a dog. Black Dog Atu's entire body was wrapped tightly in white cloth. It looked just like a white dog. It lay on the ground beside the puddle and slept for a long time. Then, it opened its eyes. The only eye it had left. The gentle light shone into Atsu's eyes. At first, it was a little surprised, but soon, it seemed to remember this familiar place and quickly calmed down. It turned its head and looked around. It found that Lu Chen was not here. This discovery made it a little worried, but soon, it realized that it was the only dog here, so it calmed down again. During this time, its eyes occasionally swept across the water, and it suddenly froze. There was a strange thing reflected in the water, a monster that was tightly wrapped in white cloth, and only its mouth, nose, and one eye were exposed. Atsu shrank back subconsciously. Then, as if it had noticed something, it shook its head at the monster in the water. The monster in the water also tilted its head. Atsu suddenly seemed to be a little happier, as if it had found something fun. It began to shake its head at the water, and after a while, it stopped. It felt a little thirsty. It moved its body, approached the puddle, and stretched its head to drink the water. The water rippled, and the sweet water slid down its throat. Atsu felt a lot better. But at this moment, it suddenly saw a shadow in the water. In its eyes, a black flame slowly lit up, burning quietly. Bang! A sound came, and Lu Chen appeared in this tree hole. He patted his clothes, stood up, and walked behind Atsu. He looked at it and said with a little surprise, "Hey, you're awake?" Atsu, who was lying by the water, slowly turned its head and looked at Lu Chen with its only eye. In the deepest part of its pupils, in an unknown place, a little black flame was burning faintly. That night, when it was dark in the mountains of Kunlun, the moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Soon, no one stayed outside. Lu Chen carried Atsu and walked quietly in the darkness of the night. It was as if he had merged with the surrounding shadows, and no one could detect him. After walking for a long time, Lu Chen stopped under a big tree. He first looked around, and then with one hand holding Atsu, who could not move, he easily climbed to the top of the tree trunk and hid in the dark. In his arms, Atsu looked around curiously, as if it didn't know why Lu Chen brought it here. Lu Chen didn't take any further action. He just sat on a branch with Atsu in his arms, and then whispered in its ear, "Don't bark. Wait here for a while." Atsu was a little confused. It looked at Lu Chen, but it still listened to Lu Chen's words and quietly nestled in his chest. On this chilly night, the man and the dog sat in the dense thicket and waited quietly. The night was getting darker, and the mountain wind was getting colder. The night in Kunlun seemed to be emotionless. It looked at the world coldly, and it looked at the vicissitudes of life. Lu Chen closed his eyes and waited in silence. From his angle, he could see the house in the distance through the gap between the branches and leaves. He didn't know when it was, but it was probably late at night. Finally, a figure came back from the distance. He walked quickly in the night and soon returned to the house. Halfway through, he suddenly stopped, as if he felt something. But when he turned his head and looked around, he didn't find anything. He frowned, and finally walked back to his house. In the deep shade of the trees, in the darkness, Lu Chen lowered his head and whispered in Atsu's ear, "Don't bark." Atsu looked at him and then nodded. Only then did Lu Chen slowly let go of his palm that was covering Atsu's ear. He stared at Atsu, and then he saw Atsu's throat emit a harsh and fierce growl. Under the creepy scar, it opened its mouth, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. "I know," Lu Chen looked at it and said faintly. Chapter 137. A green leaf rolled a few times from the old eaves tiles, then floated in the wind, swept across the alley, and slowly fell in the distance. In the deserted little shop, there was a pot of hot tea and 2 cups. Hot steam rose from the clear tea and floated in the air, exuding a unique fragrance. "How does it taste?" "This is a rare top-grade tea." Lu Chen asked Old Ma. Old Ma smacked his lips a few times, then said seriously, "I can't taste it. It feels similar to my crude tea." "Brute." Lu Chen glanced at him disdainfully and shook his head. He picked up the teacup in his hand and took another sip, saying, "Smell the aroma and taste the mellow aftertaste in your mouth. It's at least 10 times better than those lousy teas of yours." Old Ma grinned and said, "I still feel that my black tea is strong enough, comfortable to drink. This tea is too bland, there's no taste at all." Lu Chen waved his hand at him. It seemed that he had already given up on this fat man's taste. Old Ma laughed, kicked a package from the side, and put it on the table, then said to Lu Chen, "These are the things you want, they're all bought. I say, why do you want these messy things for no reason? Those bones can barely be regarded as spiritual materials, but what do you want the cinnabar charm brush for? Do you want to draw talismans?" He stared at Lu Chen and said, "I don't remember you learning this skill." Lu Chen laughed in ridicule as he casually took the bag and placed it by his side, and then he said bluntly with disdain, "Let's not talk about whether I know talismans or not. Just based on my natural talent, I know everything I learn. How much do you know about me? Stop bragging. Why do I feel that it's you who is bragging?" The alley outside the house was deep and quiet, and the fragrance of tea lingered in the house. 2 people sat facing each other. "Last time you asked me to investigate the matter of those 2 women, there was some news recently." Old Ma lowered his voice and said to Lu Chen. Lu Chen's hand that was pouring tea paused for a moment before he said, "Go ahead. There's nothing unusual about Su Qingjun, but that little girl from the Bai family seems a little strange." Lu Chen frowned slightly and didn't say anything. Speaking of which, these 2 people are really difficult to investigate. Right now, they are treasures in the eyes of the various families, and it is too late to guard them to the death. Fortunately, the 2 of them are very famous, so some stories and rumors still spread in private. Old Ma didn't immediately point out what was strange, but sighed first. "Rumor?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Can that thing be trusted?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "There's no other way. These 2 girls are now closely watched by the 2 aristocratic families and the Kunlun party. If the investigation is a little too big, it will alert the enemy, so we can only take it slow. Do you want to hear these rumors? If not, then wait for a while and see what else I can find out. Lu Chen took a sip of tea and said, since we have nothing to do, let's hear it. Su Qingjun has been the legitimate daughter of the eldest branch since she was young, and her talent was confirmed early on, so she has always been doted on by the Su family and is seen as a pearl in the palm. Every step she took was the best. She hired the best teachers to study and learn how to read. She cultivated the best and most suitable cultivation methods and divine arts. She was intelligent, knowledgeable, and well-mannered. On top of that, she was born with a beauty that would cause flowers to blush and the moon to block the moon. In any case, I have never seen such a perfect woman. Old Ma sighed and said with emotion, I don't know which man in the future will have the good fortune to become a cultivation companion with such a woman. Lu Chen said, I don't know about others, but I don't think you have any hope. Old Ma said angrily, you talk too much. You make it sound like you have hope. Lu Chen laughed heartily, raised the teacup, and drained it in one gulp. Old Ma ignored him and continued, compared to Su Qingjun, that girl White Lotus is a little strange. It is said that she is not the daughter of the main branch of the Bai family, but the child of a distant branch. 2 years ago, no one had even heard of her. It is as if a peerless genius suddenly appeared in the Bai family overnight. Lu Chen slowly put down the wine cup and looked at Old Ma. Old Ma was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Lu Chen nodded and said, it sounds like there is indeed something strange. Old Ma said, I have carefully inquired about it, but all the information is from the past 2 years. When that girl was 8 or 9 years old or even earlier, everything is blank. No one has mentioned her, and it seems that no one knows. Lu Chen's fingers gently rubbed on the table. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, but if there is a problem with White Lotus's background, the Kunlun party will definitely not allow her to be accepted by Hakushin Jinkuan. Old Ma nodded and said, of course. What kind of status does Hakushin Jinkuan have? His successor will definitely be thoroughly investigated by the Kunlun party. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, during my days on Kunlun Mountain, I have heard rumors about Hakushin Jinkuan and the Bai family in private several times. Are they related? Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, I know that. There is indeed no relationship. Bai Chen is the Daoist name bestowed by Patriarch Tianhong in the past. The word Bai should be a coincidence. Lu Chen tersely acknowledged his words and said, then continue investigating. Let's slow down on Su Qingjun for now. We have to investigate White Lotus in detail, especially her experiences before she came to the Bai family. It's best if we can dig it out. Old Ma glanced at him and said, did you discover something? Why are you so fixated on this 10-year-old girl? If there's anything wrong, you have to tell me. Lu Chen smiled and said with a calm expression, I just have a nagging feeling that she's a little strange. Old Ma shrugged and said, all right, I'll investigate slowly. Be careful on the mountain. The next day, sunlight shone down from the clear sky and shone on the flowing fragrance garden. In a hall outside the herb garden, Xian and Melaleuca japonica were together. As usual, Xian made tea for Melaleuca japonica and chatted with her to relieve her boredom. The fragrance of the tea wafted in the air. Melaleuca japonica picked up the teacup Xian handed her and took a sip. Then, her eyes narrowed slightly and she praised, good tea. Xian giggled on the side. She flipped her palm and poured herself a cup of tea. Melaleuca japonica lightly tapped the tea table and sighed. With a smile, she said, cultivating while drinking tea, the heart is as calm as water. I heard about this realm from my Sherzuan when I was young. It's only now that I vaguely have this feeling. Xian smiled and said, how is that possible? Shershu, your cultivation is so high. You must have long surpassed the realm mentioned by Sherzuan. Melaleuca japonica glared at her and scolded, little girl, you're blindly flattering me. My Sherzuan's cultivation is as high as the heavens. She is the top Yuanyingzhenren. How can I compare to her? Xian stuck out her tongue. Melaleuca japonica drank the tea in her hand and placed the cup on the tea tray. Xian came over and added another cup for her. At the same time, she said, Shirshu, it's been a while. Why hasn't there been any movement from my Sherzuan side? Melaleuca japonica was silent for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of worry in her eyes. She said, yes. Logically, she shouldn't have taken so long. Could it be that she has encountered a huge problem when she is breaking through the life and death barrier? Xian was shocked. She said, what? Then is my Sherzuan in danger? Melaleuca japonica said, the life and death barrier. If you pass it, you will survive. If you retreat, there will be great difficulties. Isn't that what it means? There will always be risks. Sigh. Xian was a little absent-minded. After a while, she sighed softly. Melaleuca japonica looked at her and couldn't help but caress her face. She said gently, it's okay. Although that old thing isn't very serious usually, her mouth is cheap and her life is tough. I think she won't die. Xian forced a smile and said, I know. I hope Sherzuan is blessed by heaven. Melaleuca japonica wanted to say something more. Suddenly, footsteps were heard outside the house. After a while, a clear and melodious voice came in. Is Shirshu Melaleuca japonica in? Disciple Su Qingjun is here to pay a visit. Melaleuca japonica and Xian were stunned. Then, they sat down and said, I'm here. Come in. A faint red light flashed. Su Qingjun, who was wearing a beautiful scarlet feather shawl, walked in. She first bowed to Melaleuca japonica and smiled. Greetings, Shirshu Melaleuca japonica. Melaleuca japonica smiled. You are now Jean Dan Friar. No need to be so polite. Come and sit with us. Su Qingjun smiled warmly and said, thank you, Uncle Master. She walked over as she spoke. Xian stood up and smiled at Su Qingjun. Sister Su, you are here. Su Qingjun nodded and smiled. Yes. I haven't seen sister for a few days. You seem to have become more beautiful. Xian smiled. She poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of Su Qingjun. Sister, have some tea. Su Qingjun thanked her. After taking a sip, she said to Melaleuca japonica, Shirshu, I came here this time to thank you. Melaleuca japonica waved her hand. It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. Su Qingjun, however, said earnestly, the red amber pill isn't easy to refine. Not to mention the amount of spirit materials used, you've spent a lot of effort to refine a spirit pill for me and help me break through to the Golden Core realm. I'll never forget your kindness. Even my father specifically told me to show my gratitude to Martial Uncle respectfully. She took out a jade box from her side and presented it to Melaleuca japonica with both hands. This is a small token of my appreciation. I can't repay Shirshu's kindness. I hope Shirshu will accept it. Melaleuca japonica smiled. She looked at Su Qingjun for a moment. Then, she took the jade box and sighed. Your father is really lucky to have such an outstanding daughter like you. I really pity you. Su Qingjun lowered her head slightly. She blushed, looking as beautiful as a fairy. She was like a lily swaying in the wind. Shirshu is too kind. Yen Luo sized her up and said with a smile, your aura is calm and steady. Does this mean that your cultivation base has almost stabilized? Su Qingjun said, almost. But recently, I still feel a little flustered and short of breath when I cultivate. My master has already told me to eat some eagle fruit. It should be able to get rid of it in about a month. Melaleuca japonica nodded. Yes. The eagle fruit is very beneficial to your dark moon arts. Your master is right. Su Qingjun smiled. She stood up and said, that's why I came here this time to ask for your help. Chapter 138. Melaleuca japonica was a bit surprised and said, eagle fruit is precious, but it can still be found. You can find it in the Baichao Tang Medicine Hall on the mountain and in the many spiritual material shops in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain. You don't need my help. Su Qingjun smiled and seemed a bit embarrassed. She said, Martial uncle, my master means that I like freshly picked eagle fruit the best. Melaleuca japonica was startled for a moment. She looked pensive and suddenly lowered her head to open the lid of the jade box in her hand. She took a look inside and her expression changed slightly. Then, she became silent. After a moment, she sighed and said, it seems that Senior Martial Brother Muyuan really has great expectations for you. Su Qingjun slightly bowed her head with a smile on her face. She didn't explain further and just said softly, I sincerely ask Martial Uncle to fulfill my wish. Qingjun can't thank you enough. Melaleuca japonica closed the jade box in her hand. After thinking for a moment, she nodded and said, all right, I'll arrange this. You can go now. There will probably be news in a few days. I'll let you know when the time comes. Su Qingjun bowed deeply to her and said with a respectful expression, thank you, Martial Uncle. Melaleuca japonica sighed and got up to avoid her. Then, she went forward to hold Su Qingjun's hand and walked out with her. She said, Qingjun, your future is promising and your achievements are limitless. You really don't need to be so polite to an old woman like me. I can't accept it. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, Martial Uncle, what are you talking about? Melaleuca japonica smiled and waved her hand to stop her. She said, it's okay. We both know what to do. Anyway, I'll remember this. Just wait for my news. Su Qingjun nodded and thanked Melaleuca japonica again. Then, she smiled and said goodbye to Xian who came out behind Melaleuca japonica before leaving. Watching the beautiful woman's figure disappear at the end of the corridor, Xian couldn't help but show a trace of envy. She said to Melaleuca japonica, Martial Uncle, Sister Su is really amazing. Whether it is cultivation, talent, appearance, or bearing, she's perfect. Melaleuca japonica smiled and didn't say anything. Then, she turned and walked back to the room. Xian followed up and asked curiously, oh right, Martial Uncle, why did you have such a big reaction when Sister Su said she wanted fresh eagle fruit? Melaleuca japonica snorted and said, what do you know? There's a lot of knowledge in that sentence. Xian was instantly interested. She pulled Melaleuca japonica's arm and said with a smile, Martial Uncle, tell me about it. Melaleuca japonica rolled her eyes and said, make tea. Okay. Xian smiled and quickly poured the cold tea. Then, she made a new cup of hot tea and placed it in front of Melaleuca japonica. Then, she said with a smile, Martial Uncle, teach me. Let me broaden my horizons. Melaleuca japonica took a sip of tea and sighed. The eagle fruit has many uses. Although it's precious, it's not a particularly rare spiritual ingredient. It's nothing much. However, there's something special about this kind of spiritual fruit. When it ripens, it naturally emits a pure spiritual energy. When the petals open, the energy will spread out for about 10 minutes. If you eat the eagle fruit during this time, the effect will increase by 10%. 10%? Xian said in surprise. That's right. Only 10%. Melaleuca japonica said calmly, because no one can pick the eagle fruit at the right time to eat it, all the eagle fruits on the market are picked and preserved. Since there's not much difference in effect, no one cares about it. Xian looked outside the door and said, then why did Sister Su, her Shifu tell her to eat fresh fruits? That's what I was talking about. Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, her Shifu, Masato Kihara, really has high expectations of her. She spares no effort in even these minor details. In this way, if there are no accidents, her foundation in the future will be almost perfect. At least in the Yuanying realm, maybe she'll have a little more confidence. Xian was stunned for a moment. Then, she shook her head and sighed. Different people have different fates. Sister Su is really lucky. Lucky. Melaleuca japonica looked at her and smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. The light and shadow distorted in mid-air. After a while, Lu Chen's figure appeared in the tree hole. Atsu, who was lying on the ground and feeling bored, suddenly raised its head. It barked and limped over. At this moment, some of the white cloth on Atsu's body had been removed, but more than half of its body was still tied up. It looked a little miserable. However, Atsu's tenacious and amazing vitality was once again displayed at this moment. After receiving treatment from Lu Chen, such serious injuries began to rapidly improve. Now, it could even walk with some difficulty. Lu Chen squatted down, hugged Atsu's head, and patted it. Then, he first checked its various wounds, nodded, and took out a bag of meat and threw it to it. Atsu immediately barked with joy, wagged its tail, and then lowered its head to eat. Lu Chen sat down and patted its head. Then, he said, you must be suffocated here. Bear with it a little longer. When your injuries are healed, you will be able to leave soon. Atsu raised its head and looked at him. It rubbed its head against his hand and then lowered its head to continue eating the meat. However, after a few bites, it suddenly raised its head and stared at Lu Chen with its only eye. It let out a few low growls. Its sharp, snow-white fangs were revealed at the side of its mouth. Even its eyes seemed to be cold. It was just like those bloodthirsty and crazy black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos. The ancient bestiality hidden in the depths of blood seemed to be emitting from this black dog bit by bit. Lu Chen looked at it quietly. After a while, he said faintly, don't worry. We will take revenge eventually. Atsu looked at him. After a while, it wagged its tail, and then lowered its head to eat the meat again. Lu Chen sat at the side and watched it eat non-stop. He watched as the white cloth gradually recovered its vitality and its shiny black fur, as well as the aura of a wild beast that was gradually revealed. Lu Chen remained silent. It was another day when the morning light shone down. The fresh air turned into a gentle breeze, blowing over the top of the flowing fragrance garden. Most of the handyman disciples came here on time to work, so did Lu Chen. But this day was a little different from usual. Jean Dan Friar, who was in charge of this area, came here with another female practitioner, Melaleuca japonica, who had white hair and a ruddy complexion. They then picked 8 people according to the name list and told them not to plant their own spirit herbs for the time being. Together, they came to the other side of the garden to a relatively independent and wider spiritual field. There were many trees planted in this spiritual field, all of the same kind. Some had already borne fruit, and the fruits were different from the others. They were green with red, oddly shaped, and somewhat resembled an eagle's beak. Lin Sheng did not immediately lecture them. Instead, he had been standing on the side with Melaleuca japonica, whispering to them. The other 8 handyman disciples stood silently beside the spiritual field, many of them looking puzzled. Lu Chen was among the 8. Coincidentally, He Changsheng was also there. When he turned around to look at the people around him, he saw He Changsheng. He Changsheng seemed to be looking at him as well. For some reason, He Changsheng looked much better than before. He no longer had that flustered and exasperated look on his face, nor did he have that violent temper. He looked much gentler. He even smiled at Lu Chen and nodded at him when Lu Chen looked at him. But if one looked closely, one would vaguely find that there was a trace of strange doubt hidden in the depths of He Changsheng's eyes. He also seemed to be secretly watching Lu Chen, as if he wanted to see something from Lu Chen. But in contrast, Lu Chen did not seem to have anything strange at all. He had been standing there quietly. Occasionally, he would meet He Changsheng's eyes, and he would nod calmly and politely. He was neither angry nor close, just the same as usual. He Changsheng looked at Lu Chen for a long time, and the doubt in his eyes deepened. After a while, Lin Sheng ended his conversation with Melaleuca japonica. It seemed that he had a clear idea of what was going on. He stood up and began to speak to the 8 handyman disciples that he had gathered. The content of his speech was not too complicated. It was nothing more than a rare 2-veined spiritual material, the eagle fruit, planted in this spiritual field. Because someone in the sect was in urgent need of this material, everyone was required to carefully cultivate it. If it was planted well, there would naturally be a reward, and the reward would be twice as much as usual. In addition to the usual harvest rewards, spiritual stones would be directly given to the person who planted the best. At this, the handyman disciples were all moved. In terms of rewards alone, this was unprecedented. And some people could also see that this time, the 8 people called over by Lin Sheng were almost the best in spiritual power cultivation among the handyman disciples in the herb garden. Obviously, this task assigned by the sect this time was for the one with the best results. With this tacit understanding and requirement, the 8 people quickly got into the mood and went down to the spiritual field. Lin Sheng nodded with satisfaction. He walked to the edge of the field and said to Melaleuca japonica, "Senior Sister Yen, what do you think?" Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Thank you for your help. It's a pity that this kind of thing could actually be done by the Foundation establishment disciples. After all, the handyman disciples have low cultivation, and their control of the 5 elements of spiritual power is still lacking." Lin Sheng smiled and said, "Who said it wasn't? But as long as the official disciples have a bit of talent, they all see this kind of farming and mulberry planting as lowly and menial work. Even if they have nothing to do, they would definitely not come here to do this. Otherwise, if it was spread out, it would be a great humiliation. They would only feel that their status would be greatly lowered, and they would not do it even if they died. Sigh, I don't know how this trend started. What a pity." Melaleuca japonica was a little helpless and said, "That's true. Forget it. Anyway, now that it's like this, we can only pick the tall ones from the short ones. Let's choose the best one." Lin Sheng smiled and said, "That's the only way." Chapter 139. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world, even in the Kunlun party, which had many rules. In fact, the Kunlun party had existed for too long, and the various big and small forces in the sect were intertwined, making it even harder to keep a secret. Perhaps in the beginning, it could be kept a secret for a while, but as time went on, more and more people knew about this matter, and the rumors would naturally spread. The eagle fruit cultivated this time was prepared for the hottest young genius in the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. This news leaked out very quickly, and then among the odd job disciples who participated in this competition, those who had a background, backing, or connections naturally knew about it, while those who didn't had a background remained in the dark. He Changsheng belonged to the kind of 3 people who didn't have a background, backing, or connections, so he didn't know about this secret. However, he wasn't an idiot. From the scale of this competition and the cautiousness of the 2 Jean Dan friar appearing at the same time, anyone would know that this matter was of great importance. He also saw that something was wrong from the expressions and movements of the other odd job disciples, but no one would specifically come over to tell him anything. He Changsheng was very depressed and angry about this, but what he could do was to do his part as he had done in the past, and hope that through this competition, there would be a chance for a carp to jump over the dragon's gate. Lu Chen's situation was actually similar to He Changsheng's. At least, he was an ordinary person with no background and backing, but he had a way out. At dusk that day, Xin secretly ran to his residence and found him. She pulled him aside and whispered to him for a long time. In the end, she solemnly said to him, Brother Lu, do you understand? You can't miss this opportunity. Lu Chen lay down on the bed, put his hands behind his head, and said with a smile, you came running to me like this, aren't you afraid that others will find out and punish you? Xin snorted and said unconcernedly, I'm not the only one. Those people from aristocratic families all had their superiors leak information to them. Besides, I heard it from Martial Aunt Melaleuca Japonica. She didn't specifically tell me not to say it, so it's fine for me to tell you. Lu Chen patted the bed and said, all right, I know what to do. Sigh, it's so nice to have someone in the imperial court. It's so easy to get things done. Xin's eyes narrowed as she smiled, but she quickly widened them again. She said to Lu Chen, Brother Lu, don't be careless. Once you're chosen, you can go to Sister Su's side. Lu Chen was startled and said, what do you mean? Xin laughed and lowered her voice, saying, even the people outside don't know about this. Martial Aunt Melaleuca Japonica only told me. It's good that you know, but don't let it slip. Lu Chen looked at her for a long time. He suddenly smiled and patted the edge of the bed, saying, little girl, you're amazing. Come and sit, let's talk. Nonsense, there's still a lot of things you don't know about me. Xin laughed proudly, then said in a low voice, actually, in this competition to plant the eagle fruit, it's just to pick out the person with the best Ling cultivation, and then go to Sister Su's side, because she wants to eat the fresh eagle fruit. She told Lu Chen about the eagle fruit in a low voice, and finally said, in order to obtain the fresh and perfect eagle fruit, Martial Aunt Melaleuca Japonica spent a lot of effort to transplant 7 eagle fruit trees from the flowing fragrance garden, and directly plant them in the exclusive Ling fields in Sister Su's cave. What's next is to have people watch over them day and night, and carefully cultivate them. The date of bearing fruit is almost set, one tree will bear fruit every 3 days. When it bears fruit, people will be called immediately, and when it's ripe, it will be eaten without any delay. In this way, in 21 days, it will be a success. Sister Su's serene moon arts will no longer be obstructed, and she can cultivate all the way to the peak of the Jin Dan realm. Lu Chen fell silent after hearing this, and after a long while, he nodded and said, so that's how it is. Xin said curiously, Brother Lu, why does your complexion look so bad? Lu Chen shook his head, smiled bitterly, and said, it's nothing, it's just that after hearing you say this, I suddenly feel that on this path of cultivation, she and I are really worlds apart. Xin laughed out loud, and covered her mouth as she laughed, and said, look at what you're saying, there's definitely a world of difference between us. Not to mention that Sister Su's family is rich, with countless wealth and goods, even if it's natural talent, the difference is still too great. So, Sister Su is a genius, she was born with a good life, and can't be forced. Look, I'm not jealous, I'm even happy for her. Lu Chen looked at her, and smiled after a while, and said, you're right, natural talent, can't be forced. Xin nodded, and then warned him, in short, Brother Lu, you just have to know. If you can be chosen this time, not only will Sister Su owe you a favor, you might even have the chance to get closer to her. With this friendship, in the future in the Kunlun party, no one will dare to bully you. Lu Chen smiled, and said, all right, I understand. Xin stared at him, and seemed to be even more nervous than when she was competing herself. She clenched her fists, and said, you must win. Lu Chen patted his chest, and said, it has to be me, don't worry. Xin laughed, and seemed to have some trust in him, and seemed to be full of confidence. The cultivation of the eagle fruit was not easy. This kind of spiritual fruit grew on the eagle fruit tree, and its trunk was slender, and its root system was developed. To adjust the spiritual energy of the 5 elements in the soil of the spiritual field was much more strenuous than normal spiritual grass, and it basically took a whole day. The odd-job disciples who were chosen to participate in this competition were all very hard-working, but due to their limited cultivation, after a whole day of cultivation, they all looked pale and exhausted by dusk. When the sun set, everyone left. Different from the grass garden, even if the odd job disciples left, this special spiritual field was still guarded by Melaleuca Japonica's people, in case of any accidents. When Xianxia left, he was quite satisfied, especially when he saw that there were people guarding the spiritual field, and he felt a lot more relieved. The disciples of the rich and powerful families were really evil, colluding with each other to suppress ordinary disciples like him. They were really evil. Fortunately, the Kunlun party was a righteous sect, and there were good people like Melaleuca Japonica and Lin Sheng, who were fair and just, so he did not enter this sect in vain. If he really had the opportunity to cultivate in the future, he would definitely thank these two benefactors. With this thought in mind, he walked back to his house. Unknowingly, the sky had already darkened, and the sun was setting in the west. It was going to be dark soon. Xianxia massaged his back, and felt a little sore. Since he was an odd job disciple, his talent was naturally not high, and his cultivation was also average. When he was working in the grass garden, he did not really work hard for a whole day like today, and it was really tiring. But for the dream of the future, it was worth it. He was thinking about the beautiful future, and like every ordinary young man, he dreamed that one day he would stand out from the rest of the world, and his cultivation would be the best in Kunlun. By then, all the Yuanyingzhenren, including the sect leader, would kneel at his feet, and countless beautiful female disciples, with Su Qingjun as the leader, would look at him with deep affection and softly ask to be his Taoist companion. These days were really too good. When he pushed open his door and walked in, there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, and he could not help but whistle. At this moment, a palm suddenly flew from behind the door, and heavily chopped the back of his neck, and even faintly heard a low muffled sound. Xianxia's eyes rolled, and without even making a sound, he directly fell forward. Behind him, the door of the house slowly closed. The night was dark, and the mountain wind blew. The darkness was like a nightmare, always entangled him, and made Xianxia feel very painful. But inexplicably, in that darkness, he recalled the first half of his life. He once had a family. However, the biggest impression that his family had left on him was that the family had declined ever since he was young. From his grandfather's generation to his father's, it seemed that everyone was reminiscing about the glory of their ancestors, and then complaining and cursing at the reality in front of them, feeling indignant. But reality was reality. In the midst of complaining and cursing, the family still continued to decline uncontrollably. When he grew up, the He family was already destitute. He was very poor and dejected. Apart from the old house, he had nothing. However, he still remembered the obsession of his father and grandfather. He reminisced about the glory of the past that he had never seen. Gradually, he regarded restoring this glory as his duty. No one can stand in my way, and I will definitely restore the reputation of the family. I will succeed in my cultivation, become a spiritual master, and then rebuild the family business, marry a... No, what kind of identity is a spiritual master? Of course, I will marry a lot of wives, have a lot of children, and then buy countless wealth and goods. I will be better than the Su family, the Bai family, and the Lin family in Kunwa City. That beautiful scene seemed to be shining with golden light. He even laughed out loud in his dreams. Then, he woke up. After waking up, he felt pain, as if his neck was being cut open. Then, when he turned his head with difficulty, he found that his hands and feet were tightly bound and thrown on the floor of the room, and there was an oil lamp on the table next to him, illuminating the room. There was another person in the room at the same time. "You're awake?" That person's back was facing him, but for some reason, he seemed to be able to sense that Xianxia had woken up. But he didn't turn his head and just faintly spoke. That voice was low and slightly hoarse, and it sounded very unfamiliar. Xianxia felt that he had never heard it before, but after a while, he inexplicably felt that it was somewhat familiar. He opened his eyes with difficulty and saw that the person's back was facing him. The person was holding a strange talisman brush in his hand, and he was drawing something on the white wall of his room. The traces drawn by the tip of the brush were as red as blood, and strange lines appeared on the white wall like the grin of a demon. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.